As a kid, I loved the Toy Story film. And you know what else I loved? The Genesis game. Played that game every time I got back from school, before I went to bed. Every time I got the chance. A fantastic game. It was pretty much Disney's answer to Donkey Kong Country. Bought a Sega Genesis yesterday. Got it from a very nice thrift shop around the block from the very kind old couple running the place. With that were cartridges of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Aladdin, The Incredible Hulk, and, to my joy, Toy Story. Finally, I thought to myself, a much needed blast from the past. It was Friday, and I had just gotten the weekend off from my job at the local Walmart. I was ready for a weekend-long nostalgic bonanza. Just me and my Genesis. So, after blowing on the cartridges and inserting the disc, I switched the knob on. After skipping the company logos and legal notices, I got the title screen. It was Woody's arms crossed, grimacing at Buzz, who was showing off to the other toys. I hit the start button, and Woody cried, as expected. After starting the game though, well, after Buzz Lightyear flew across the screen and knocked over the Toy Story logo, things went downhill. After a description of what happened in the movie, complete with photos, the first level started where you would have to free the Green Army men and prepare the baby monitor for Andy's birthday party. An easy stage, but things were a little off. A little being an understatement. The lighting was in the evening sunset, similar to the stages after the RC level, where Woody is confronted by the toys and must help Rex escape from the room. But level design was the same as in the original, aside from that. But the background music was the Nightmare Buzz theme. I didn't know what was going on, but I played along, I guess. As I ran through the levels, I noticed there were no obnoxious enemies in my path, but a few obstacles to attack with my pull string. At the end of the stage, on the shelf where the baby monitor would be, there were small pieces of what looked similar to Bo Peep's limbs. Buzz was standing there, waiting. When I landed on the ground, a cutscene was triggered. Words appeared over the black background. No music. No digitalized images from the film. Just words in normal white font. Bo Peep took a tumble. She's gone, Woody. Then I saw a completely animated, digitalized CGI clip. It looked like one of those Sega CD clips with the 64-bit graphic capabilities, much lower than 240p, but probably would have looked slightly impressive for the time. The clip featured a shocked, heartbroken Woody, holding and staring into the eyes of Bo Peep's severed head, going into a sobbing fit and repeating the word no. Bo Peep's eyes staring lifelessly back at him. The weird part? It was the same audio clip from the first Toy Story film, during the scene where Woody lights a match to ignite Buzz's rocket, only to be thwarted by a passing car. As Woody sobbed, Buzz pouted in shame. Then, the clip ended when Woody turned his head towards the screen with a menacing glare, the look of an enraged killer. Then it faded to black, and another audio file played. "You!" Another quote from Toy Story 1, when Andy abandoned the toys at the gas station by mistake. Gameplay returned. Apparently, I was now fighting Buzz. He seemed to be walking quite slowly towards me. Seems like an easy battle. Things got real weird as soon as I whipped Buzz. His parts went everywhere, and the Wilhelm scream sound effect played, like in the movie. Felt corny at first. Then the screen faded to more white text. "This was your fault, Buzz. I loved her more than Andy could ever love you." Now that really puzzled me. Woody wouldn't even dare compare his love for Bo Peep to his devotion to Andy, let alone Buzz's. This cartridge was getting stranger by the minute. Next was a still shot of Mr. Potato Head, pointing at Woody. "Murderer!" cried yet another recycled clip from Toy Story 1. The shot faded and was replaced with a clip of Woody, again glaring at the screen. Gameplay went back up, and apparently I was supposed to whip Mr. Potato Head, Robot, Rocky, Ham, and strangely, even Rex, who helps you during the game. No music in the background, just what sounded like a church bell striking 12. Pieces flew everywhere as I swatted the toys one after the other. Finally, after swatting Rex, the screen faded again. More white text. "I won't live in a world without her." Then, it showed a CGI clip of Woody falling out of the same window that Buzz was knocked out of in the movie. Except, he ended up landing on the driveway. His head shattered loudly and violently into shards of plastic as his body lay lifelessly. After the cutscene faded, I was taken to the fight with Nightmare Buzz. Things were the same, except rather than the usual quote that played before the fight, "You wouldn't want to be in the way when my laser goes off." The sound clip was Buzz murmuring, "Why did you do it, Woody?" I tried to fight back, but the lasso would only go through him, unharmed, even when he was checking his wrist communicator. After helplessly losing all my health, Woody went into his game over animation, where he'd bleakly pound the floor. Then Buzz flew into Woody, and both of them dissolved into the ground. Another fade, and more text. "There is only one place suited for your kind, cowboy." Then a hellish cave with green fire faded in, with the words "Game over," along with the normal game over music. Then fade, and one last text. "I'm sorry, Bo." I couldn't skip the text. It seemed to be one of those unskippable screens, like when you beat the game. I shut off the system, pulled out the cartridge, and played some Aladdin. I didn't sleep all weekend.
Do you like old cartoons? If your first reaction is to talk about Gummy Bears or DuckTales, you're about 70 years off the mark. I'm talking before television, before colour, back when just moving images on a screen was novel enough to draw a crowd. You've felt this. You know this. There's something different about those old cartoons. A sense of depth, a sense of real momentum and weight. It felt strange, didn't it? Beyond the dated references and comedy. The official story is lithograph backgrounds, shadow boxes, and a bunch of other film geek horse shit that 90% of people believe because they don't understand, and the other 10% don't care about because we are long past any of those techniques being useful. But ask yourself this. Why did animation turn to shit sometime in the 50s? How does it make sense that we went from Popeye to Clutch Cargo, from images you could feel the depth of to flat, static, almost puppet-like cartoons? I'm Ethan Benson. I've proudly served in 2 world wars and begrudgingly stomped through a few more scuffles before my retirement from Uncle Sam's family business. I'm probably a contender for the oldest man alive. You'll never see me on the second to last page of a newspaper though. Once I got away from the service, I did everything I could to live a life as small and out of the way as possible. I came to the conclusion last year that being able to get my own mail and wipe my own arse doesn't mean I still have a couple of decades left. This old war machine is falling apart. But before I do, I want to share some things with you. At this point, I have nothing to lose. Most people will think I'm just a crazy old bastard, and the rest, well, what are the G-men gonna do if they catch wind? Kill me? If they manage to find enough functioning nerves to torture, they've done a better job than my last 2 doctors, so good on them. What I'm saying is, I've got nothing to lose, but maybe I've got something to give. It was 1922, a few years after my life meant something, and a decade and a half before it would again. No wife, no kids. I wasn't a drifter, but not for lack of trying. Something kept bringing me back to a small town in Michigan, year after year though. Didn't take to being a soldier during peacetime, not as a young man anyway. I preferred to make my money here and there, see what my country had to offer. I sat eating my lunch on a park bench, watching folk without heads full of things they shouldn't have seen walk along blissfully unaware of the cruelty of their fellow man. I recognised the man that sat down beside me, but that didn't make me any less suspicious. There a war broke out I haven't heard of? I say, lighting up a cigarette. The man that sits beside me isn't a soldier. He's the kind of guy who goes by a last name he was assigned after training. Debriefed me a few times after some of the thickest shit I've had to wade through, asked me questions I didn't understand, and expect answers I didn't have. No, Corporal. Just an opportunity. The man I know as Mr. Thompson says. What do you know of animation? Cartoons? Kids stuff, I say looking forward, not making eye contact. Maybe. But it's big business, Hiram, Thompson says. Ethan, I correct. My mistake. Ethan. There is a man looking to make a legacy selling cartoons. This man has a friend powerful enough to make this happen. Someone who eats at the same tables as my bosses do. He's looking to be the Henry Ford of what he does. He isn't the first, but he aims to be the biggest and the best. He has his artists, he has his inventors, and now He needs a few men like yourself to make sure those guys can do their jobs. I don't like the way Thompson talks. He's taking up a lot of my time to say very little. Let's get to brass tacks here. Why in the Lord's name would a bunch of civilian doodlers need me? I say, standing up to throw away the remains of my lunch. Well, that's not something I can say to someone who hasn't signed on, but every man has a price, even for an unknown task, and I think you know what yours is. Thompson doesn't sound smug, just sure. He was right, and I figured that if I ended up in some kind of sex crime or aiming at folk that didn't deserve it, I could simply turn and walk away. Thompson was right. I wasn't. What in the hell is that thing? I say, pointing to a contraption worn by one of the crew. I assume it had to be a weapon of some form. It has a backpack full of humming electronics connected to what look like the business end of a flamethrower. But instead of a nozzle, it's a massive square camera lens. Leroy, a black man in his early 30s, wears the thing like he's used to it, testing out the range of motion the rig has as he answers me. The most advanced rotoscope money can buy. This little darling has hours of recording time and lets us edit raw footage within a couple of hours. If this place is interesting enough, Pierre, the director, says. He's a rat-like, cruel-looking man, without a hint of a French accent, despite his claims having lived there most his life. Among the half a dozen crew there are a couple of chuckles, but most silently go about checking film gear that I can't even guess to the function of. We are kitting ourselves up in a dark warehouse, getting ready to be driven in the back of what looks like a paddy wagon. Thompson watches us all. I hate his eyes. Always scrutinizing, but not showing a damn hint of what the man is thinking. Ezekiel Greenberg, biologist, a man with thick glasses and greased down parted hair, says, offering his hand. The hell is that? I say, shaking his hand. He has a grip like wet bread. Someone who studies living things, a man of science, Ezekiel clarifies. Shalom, Zeke. Why would we need someone like that for making a cartoon? I ask. Everyone, Thompson says, loud enough to catch our attention. He motions us over. Other than going to some shithole close to 4 hours away, do we get to know what we're doing now? A tall, olive-skinned woman says. Sylvia was her name. A few trinkets hang from her wrist, an eclectic combination of various religious symbols. I'd assumed that was clear. Pierre and Leroy will be collecting footage, Ezekiel will be taking notes, and the rest of you will be ensuring this happens in a safe fashion. You need to understand, everything from the wildlife to the environment itself is going to be hostile towards you. This place isn't somewhere you get by accident, and it's not a place man was meant to be. You will be encountering threats of a physical, mental, and possibly even spiritual nature, Thompson starts. The last member of the squad was a tall, square-jawed man named Chauncey. Looks like a fighter, but more like someone who got his scars in a back alley, not on a battlefield. He wears a white shirt, black suspenders, and one of those pork pie hats that Brits seem to like. Spiritual, the tall man scoffs, a smirk cracking his pale, scarred face. Thompson shrugs. If you believe that kind of thing anyway. Our client is looking for a great reward, and you are all being compensated for the great risk. Anything else? Well, you'll understand when you arrive. Speed and discretion are the order of the day, people. We barely fit ourselves into the cramped van, and after what I put at somewhere around 6 hours of ass-destroying potholes and rough terrain, we arrive. We exit the paddy wagon and enter what seems to be a large cave. It's dim, but not dark. About half a click ahead of us is daylight. Thompson had me running light. Some kind of Dane submachine gun, a Thompson pistol, and a couple of smoke grenades. Chauncey now wears a cargo vest, hiking boots, and sports nothing more warlike than a large curve-handled knife. As we approach the exit of the cave, My mind conjured up all kinds of things, some mundane, some paranormal, all horrifying. But what I saw when we left the safety of the damp rock made all those look like pleasant daydreams. The reek hit me first, a low, deep smell of industrial waste and rot. Chemical tang and fetid miasma trying to outdo each other for the title of the world's most offensive odour. Then, my brain struggled to make sense of the sheer amount of motion I was seeing. I'm going to call where we found ourselves a forest. But god damn, that's only because there is no other word I can think of that would fit the bill. Like calling a porcupine a thumbtack, really. All around us were tall, whip-like, dirty, grey, not quite wooden things. Each bound and swayed as if it was dancing to the beat of some song we couldn't hear. It seemed impossible. The sheer weight of things should be tearing apart the hard-packed, red-tinted soil. Ezekiel, despite looking like a Poindexter, runs fearlessly over to one of the trees. He scratches it with a small pocket knife and pushes it with his hand. It's rock solid, he says, having to duck to avoid an especially low sway. That's great, Zeke, but get the hell away from it, I say, doing my best drill sergeant impression. He actually takes a couple of seconds to mull it over before going back with the group. Leroy, get about 15 minutes of this for B-roll, Pierre demands. Leroy sighs, and the machine he's lugging about starts to hum as he aims it around us. Chansey pulls out a map. I see a mountain, a body of water and a forest. We have about a 2-kilometer hike before we get to the river. I suggest making as little noise as possible as we do so, the scarred man says, glowering at Pierre. You been here before? I ask. I've been to every jungle on Earth, this being the only exception. Wiggly trees or not, it's no more dangerous than any of them, Chauncey answers. The forest is full of things. If I described them all, we'd be here all night. But each and every one of them seems like an attempt or a mockery at something natural. Fleshy rocks that seem to be grinning or scowling at the right angle. Four-legged deer-like things with massive human eyes and bobbing tiny heads. Or even small flittering insects that seem to whisper as they buzz by. This place feels weird, menacing, and in a way I can't describe, purpose-built. My heart pounds as I grip the SMG. I don't like the look of the wildlife. Beyond the obvious, they seem smart. There's a hint of understanding behind every twisted, manic creature's eyes. I notice Sylvia taking something from a small brass container and dropping it on the ground every so often. Breadcrumbs. I think the big guy's here to find our way back, I say, trying to start a conversation to keep my mind off this nightmare. The ashes of a holy man, she says. Roma, I'm guessing, I say, trying to place her accent. Gypsy, I'm proud of it, she says, spitting on the ground. That's for the Roma. I chuckle. Think that stuff's going to keep us safe? I ask, as something in the tree line catches my eye. Let's hope we don't have to find out. I like her answer, but not the implication. I start to wonder why I'm feeling seasick, but Leroy brings up the topic first. There's no horizon, he says fearfully. And the man isn't wrong. As the forest begins to thin, there's no end in sight, no curve at which you just can't see. I can make out hundreds of structures, water and islands for what must be hundreds of kilometers away. Ezekiel seems enraptured. This place, it can't exist, he says, taking notes as we walk. This is just an impossibility. Even if there were a place flat enough, where could it be? We are seeing sun, so we can't be underground. Completely fascinating. I hate the bookworm's glee, but he isn't wrong. It takes us until almost the tree line to notice the bodies. They are entwined with the roots of the dancing, swaying tree-like things, looking half-eaten, faces frozen for eternity, or slightly twitching in their last moments of life. Obviously we're going to want to edit those out, Pierre says. His callousness makes me want to break his jaw. People live here, I say, half to myself. These people were either brought here or came here, Chauncey says matter-of-factly. Wherever we are, it's far away from the States. I doubt if there were folks who called this place home, they'd be wearing dungarees and skirts we've all seen at Woolworths. My head is on a swivel as we hit the tree line, finally getting a clear view of the massive body of murky green water and the floating carnival of horror it held. The ships had no sense of conformality, each a unique, impossible barge of rotten wood, rusted steel on what appeared to be worked human remains. We could have chose any number from the hundreds floating by. Each was its own impossibly buoyant war crime. But Pierre pointed out one that bore a slight resemblance to an old-fashioned steamboat, if you squint real hard. Horsetooth pipes belched out thick, almost inky smoke from its roof. They snap and fight with each other like stray dogs, and at its helm was a squat, pug-faced, almost goblinoid thing. Its skin was shadow black, with weeping grey sores. It wore gore-stained overalls, cut into short pants. In the front of it is a breaking wheel, some poor soul bound to it, screaming as the manic creature twists the torture implement, sending the barge on a crazy zigzagging journey. Pierre looks rapt, swatting Leroy in the arm and pointing. Say what you will about my reasons for signing up. Watching this bastard get his jollies watching someone be slowly torn apart makes my trigger finger itch. Behind the first creature comes a second, massive, flesh mountain of a thing, clad in a robe of sorts, stitched together from what must be the outfits of a dozen people. The interaction is brutal, half fight, half conversation, but as the massive one takes the wheel, we notice none of the horrific blows cause any lasting harm. Think your pistols and knives will keep us safe, Sylvia says with a smirk. She pats a black velvet bag at her side. If we just get the footage and get out, we won't need to be kept safe, Chauncey says. We slowly creep along the tree line, following the barge. Its destination seems to be a long dock. Its wood is pale and warped. Its timber sways slightly. The ship pulls up, and a strange device, some kind of harness, on an almost gallows-like structure, swings towards the barge of its own accord. The two fiends open a hatch in the deck and drag forth something no horror of war before or since could match. Two people, torn apart and cruelly stitched together into a four-legged, almost bovine abomination. This wasn't some Frankenstein's monster, some marvel of a mad mind. No. As it was dragged and slammed into the harness, it became crystal clear that this was just two poor folks ripped apart and jammed together, living their final moments racked in pain, confused and crippled. Both things stand covered in gore, grinning, inflicting damage upon each other in celebration of whatever the hell they just did. The two corpses twist and scream as the harness slides down the dock with a wooden grating noise. Chauncey is trying to look unfazed. Ezekiel looks about 2 seconds away from a heart attack. I close my eyes, trying to find some sense of calm, some sense of reality in this mess. We need to go. Now, Sylvia says. I open my eyes and see why. Both of the things, 2, maybe 3 kilometers away, start staring directly at us. Stay calm. They could be looking at anything, Chauncey says. The small, almost rodent-like one waves. Pierre tries to protest, but before he can get started, I slam the butt of my SMG into the bridge of his nose. His demands turn to a scream as I grab him and shove the insufferable little prick back the way we came. We sprint, The forest around us begins to go mad with motion. Behind us, a deafening roar of water and rage. I can't help but look. The ship raises itself on tubular, pulsing legs, hundreds of meters long. It bears a giant, idiot grin. It's more saw-toothed and flanked by massive doll-like eyes. The creatures aboard plant instruments constructed of flesh and bone. The racket still audible over the displaced water and supernatural rage. As we sprint towards the mouth of the cave, we hear other, smaller noises all around us. I see the rat-like evil little prick turn around, and the look on his face tells me he hasn't learned his lesson. I grab a fistful of shirt and intend to put him out and sling the half a man over my shoulder. When I do, he shoves something in my face. I know what it is and let go of the evil little manlet. There is charge in the rotoscope capable of destroying everything within 200 feet. Leroy, get me footage of that thing. We did not come here to fail. Pierre grins as he talks. Leroy listens. The sounds around us get closer. Why? Just answer me that, I say. Because I believe in Mr. D. I believe in his vision, and if it costs me my life, so be it, is his reply. The little prick looks like a cult member. Chauncey takes off his vest, drawing a massive cookery. Sylvia begins to take items out of her bag and begins to recite something in a language I've never heard. A dozen or so things come out of the forest, no bigger than a dog, almost perfect clones of the small rodent-like thing on the ship. They are dressed in motley, each seeming to be a different profession. One looks like a doctor, another a dock worker, a third might be a waiter or usher. They swarm the massive man, but in an instant, I can tell the guy is used to dealing with dangerous creatures. He moves and stabs with his knife, never getting too close. After a few seconds, we see the small creatures are nowhere near as resilient as the one on the barge. I try to get an angle for a shot, but I don't feel confident I can do it without hitting Chauncey. But he doesn't seem to need help. Tiny, onyx, pock-filled limbs fly. Screaming, goblin-like creatures hit the dirt. Sylvia's chant reaches a crescendo. I feel pressure. Objects she's placed around her begin to rattle. The ship is close now, maybe half a kilometre away, and closing fast. Faster than Chauncey's dodge. The big man stumbles, a piece missing from the back of his thigh. Before he can regain his stance, 2, then 3 of the things are on him. They make short work of him once he hits the ground. The man is gutted like a trout in seconds. Stay close, Sylvia says. She stands with her eyes closed, sweat starting to bead on her brow. More footage, Pierre screams. Leroy says something to him in French. All I made out was mad. We stand next to Sylvia as the things start to close in. The boat looms like the face of God himself, but something is keeping this unholy horde about 20 feet from us. I fire a burst at the boat. I might as well have spit at it. Another at the crowd of cloned rats, but they move long before the rounds hit. Sylvia begins to slowly walk backwards, the monsters advancing with her pace. How long can you keep this up? I ask. I don't know. Less if we have to keep talking, she says curtly. The pace is slow, but we can't be more than 100 meters from the mouth of the cave. Sylvia stumbles for a moment. The pressure around us begins to lighten. She sweeps one arm out, trying to regain balance. I saw nothing but a blur. Then, in an instant, Sylvia's arm was pierced by the tip of one of the tree-like thing's branches. She's dragged into the air screaming, blood from her arm falling like rain. I try shooting the branch. Sparks, noise, and nothing more. The horde takes its time, closing in like nightfall. I change magazines. What are we going to do? Ezekiel screams. I take in a deep breath, line up my target, and hope my sharpshooting skills aren't too rusty. The burst severs her arm. I drop the weapon, doing my best to cushion her fall. 2 ribs crack. I scream as we hit the ground. Zeke, to his credit, begins to dress the wound immediately. Judging by the small medical kit he had on him, he probably had enough skill to do the job well enough till we can find a hospital.
"This is no monster, Hiram," Sylvia says, pain making her words clipped.
So, we're fucked, I say, assuming the obvious.
"I have no ward or command that will sway them. They may accept a sacrifice,"
she says. I hesitate. Some people need killing. That's not what bothers me. But looking at these things, these impossible, powerful things, I understand what I'm doing. I'm not just killing a man. I'm making a sacrifice to things that are either demons or close enough to it, it doesn't matter. But if I don't... Pierre, I'm going to make you an offer. We duke it out. Whichever one of us is left standing gets to walk away, I say, standing. I'll end us all before I let you lay a hand on me, the smug little shit says, brandishing his detonator. My knife isn't as big as Chauncey's, but it's sharp and small enough to conceal up a sleeve. The detonator falls as the blade severs the tendons in Pierre's wrist. He tries to come at me. I let him, for a few seconds. I take his blows, my lip splits, a cracked rib pulses with pain. Then, I aim my pistol downwards. It turns his kneecap into a dripping rose of bone and flesh. I turn to face the horde. The barge itself lowers its body, staring at us from 2 feet away. Rank seawater breath hits us like a mortar. As I talk, Sylvia repeats what I say in the same landless language. He's yours. I, Hiram Benson, give you this man. In exchange, we leave, I say, trying to make eye contact with the demonic construct. I felt something then, like a bloom of sadness deep inside of my brain, a cold, dim spot that never really went away. Turn around, slowly, Sylvia says, putting one arm around my shoulders. We make it back to the cave, and to that same warehouse, leaving parts of our bodies, and likely souls behind. You looking for a happy ending? Well, we all got paid. And for what it's worth, Sylvia made it through real surgery. But the thing is, that ain't the end. No. Here is where you need to worry. Those things we so ignorantly recorded, those things that have part of my soul, they were more than we knew. Their danger wasn't limited to claws and teeth. See, some of them, they can live in images. A piece of themselves stays in every copy. And kids, there are a lot of copies. Mr. D and others sent plenty of teens just like mine into those places, layered a happy face over the frantic evil, and put them in homes, theatres and schools across the world. In fact, I'd bet a lot of you have 1 or 2 sitting around right now, a DVD bought in a bargain bin, maybe a video you watched on YouTube. You've felt it. You've seen it. Now you understand it. My advice, just let these things die. Let these macabre melodies get lost in time. Don't go searching old cartoons to see if you can catch a glimpse, an untouched frame of pure evil. Now, I've never been one to turn down a paycheck, but if you folks need more lessons from an old man who might not see summer, let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you are the first generation to actually listen to your elders. I thought long and hard about if I should write anything else. Don't get me wrong. Whatever comes my way, let it come. I have no family, no friends. And if I was any closer to death's door, I'd be sleeping on his couch. But it's you kids I've been thinking about. I don't know exactly what I expected when I put up what happened. Maybe put a little of the fear of God into you lot, keep you away from things that go bump in the night. But instead, I've got strangers from across the world asking how they can help. So I want to make this more than just the ramblings of an old man. Give you some information you can use, if, heaven forbid, you find yourself on the receiving end of something that doesn't follow God's law. Before I tell you about the second time I got involved with Mr. D, let's go over things that are happening today a little. Every copy of something made like this has potential to turn rotten. Some more than others. Usually older copies, or ones with some kind of historical significance. As for other kinds of messed up videotapes, I don't know. I've had a handful of jobs that brush up against this stuff. I'm no Ghostbuster. They like to be around each other. If you started off collecting and got one, you'll find yourself drawn to certain other pieces of animation or film, seemingly at random. If you want to try and get mixed up in this, first, I'd ask yourself why. Do you want a cheap scare? Well, just watch. Eventually, you'll get a few frames of something off. Probably happened already, but just slipped right by. Doing this isn't very dangerous, unless you make it a habit. Quantity can, over time, make up for quality. You want to see what's really there, hiding in the shadows and magnetic ribbon? Well, that's a little harder. This is going to change your perspective on life. A lot of folks, it turns them cold. Doing this is stupid. But on the other hand, it's the only way to test the waters, to see if you could look one of those things in the face. You want to do something about this century-old curse. This is the first step. Memorize the piece of media. I'm not talking grade school math test. You need to be able to quote it, to describe it nearly perfectly. Copy it, then copy the copy. The more times you do this, the worse the quality. The easier it is for whatever is on the other side to knock on the window. The key is to not go so far as you can't see what you're looking for when it happens. From there, it's just a matter of watch, rinse, repeat. What exactly happens? Can it hurt you? You'll find out. If you go into this, you need to understand there are some things that won't or can't know. That's the danger. Sometimes, you're just an egg, and the shit you're looking at is a brick wall. 1927, and I'll spare you the lead up to this time. It was much of the same, and ended up with myself, Sylvia, Ezekiel, Leroy, and a new man, a tall guy with thick, slicked back blonde hair, and a suit that cost more than my car, standing around the back of a slightly newer model of paddy wagon. Sylvia's arm was replaced with a dull grey steel prosthetic. Zeke was missing the gee whiz look he had on our last trip, and the contraption Leroy was wearing was sleeker, less bulky. We're ready to go. Thompson stands like a school marm. Good to see you all. You've probably guessed by now that you're going back to Project Mountain. The area has been significantly tamed, and being used to test run a few ideas Mr. D plans on unveiling to the world in the next few decades. That being said, radio or telegraph signals are next to impossible to get in or out. Something about the magnetic field.
I don't know. You five make contact with our people at the coordinates on your map and relay any information they have for us. This should be simple, quick, and painless. We just wanted a few folk who knew their way around, the agent informed us. Who's the suit? Leroy says. Doesn't look like much of a jungle explorer. Thompson glowers at Leroy from behind darkened glasses. The man in the suit simply smiles. Very correct observation, the newcomer starts. My name is Arthur Deus, and I am Mr. D's benefactor. He has the vision and the money. I have the means to make things happen. One of those things is the place we will be visiting. I want to gather some data, shake a few hands, and, well, if I'm being honest, micromanage, just a little bit. Ah, so really this is an escort mission. We are the oh shit button, aren't we, Thompson? I say. I don't get a response, but I know I'm right. This time, the terrible ride ends with us being led to a nice, military-style pickup. I drive, and what I see, well, I can't say the place was inviting by any means, but we were driving on road at least. The twitching, bouncing trees were still thick on the side of the pavement, and I could catch the odd glimpse of massive-eyed, not quite natural things within the forest from time to time. There was a sense of dread in the truck, all of us back somewhere we never wanted to go again. Now this is the point where I'm sure you're asking yourself, yes Ethan, you dumb bastard, you didn't want to go back, so why did you? And I don't blame you. Hindsight being 2020 and all, I should have ran as far away from Thompson as fast as I could, but, and I'm sure you're as sick of hearing this as I was at your age, things, they were different back then. I want to be clear, I don't mean better. I lost too many friends for too many mundane, stupid, preventable reasons to say that. But yeah, different. Going through trauma. Well, that didn't mean anything other than you got out the other end. You didn't talk about it. You jammed shit down and you got through your day. And working, well, shit job equals better money. Way of the world for everyone but the Hearsts and Rockefellers. In the distance, we see what is unmistakably an amusement park. The gate was styled like a medieval castle with false perspective mountains on either side. I'm the first to laugh. Willie World, I snicker. The strung nerves in the truck let go, and we all begin to laugh. A cloud passes over Art's face, but in a moment he's smiling, taking the jab in good fun. A working title, if you will, he says. I'd hope so, unless it's Tallywhacker Museum, Leroy replies. That I'd pay to see, Sylvia says. I'm going to save you some time again. The place we enter is much like the place you're expecting. About a quarter of the size, maybe a little less. It has most of what you'd expect, though a lot of the things are mock-ups or stand-ins for future expansions. Folks are working and using the amenities. The first thing I notice is they're all adults, staffed entirely by people like yourself who were willing to take a little risk. Used by the same, all employees, free to leave of their own free will. You seem like the sort that'd ask, Art says. I don't outright hate him, but I can't say I approve of his attitude. The second thing I notice makes me ready the rifle I demanded for this trip down memory lane. I can tell, at a glance, they are at least related to the things we saw on the boats, but each of them seems to be configured in a unique way, no two quite sharing the same features. They're stuffed into oversized suits, some partially, some fully encased in plush heads, feet, and friendly-looking costumes. Each is attended by two people. One carries a thick-handled, two-pronged spear-like device, wires and bolts attached to it.
The other seems to be taking notes. I become enthralled with a tall, canine-looking thing. Its exposed legs were yellow-skinned with thin, black fur. A worn vest is stapled to it, and it wears a massive, goofy-looking cartoon dog head. It waves and dances at the passers-by, but suddenly, as if hit by a fit or seizure, its posture changes. It hunches and starts to run at a couple enjoying a set of Italian ices. But before it can get far, its handler jabs it with the device. I don't see blood or any sign of damage, but the thing hits the ground face first, and the handler drags it away by the feet. A slight woman with a military-style haircut following them, writing furiously. Still working out a few issues, as you can see. But in time, we will manage to find out how to best make use of the locals. Art adds to the horrifying scene. I can't say I wasn't afraid. The 7-foot creature being trained around me set me on edge worse than any Hun sniper ever could. That being said, what was going on seemed strange, dangerous for sure, but I wasn't seeing any kind of evil, torture-laden shitstorm I was expecting. It was more coal mine than war crime. You four spend the next 24 hours as you wish. There is plenty to see and do. Let me know how everything is, where we can improve. Be honest, I'm looking for data, not to have my arse kissed, Art says, walking down the street lined with cheap 4 cobblestone, and the storefronts both real and decorative. How does everyone feel about Arthur? Zeke says as we take in the sights.
Fop, Sylvia says.
Creepy, Leroy adds.
Puts,
I chime in. Zeke looks like he wants to say something, but then only adds, you guys are probably right. I think this place is just giving me the heebie-jeebies. I don't judge Zeke for the statement. The more we see of this place, the more the combination of family-friendly and demonic entity becomes apparent. The people are all pale and sickly, as if this place takes some kind of toll on the human body. The creatures, for all their leather-skinned, lesion-infested horror, seem beaten and tortured. I hate to have literal sympathy for the devil here, but Art, or his men, have found ways to control and herd them. I see violence, a person testing the park having a rouge, duck-themed, half-dressed thing bit a plate-sized chunk out of them, as an example. But these things are put down with vigour and brutality. I don't feel safe. None of us do. But I'm just as worried about Art's cronies as the dancing, screaming things they have a tenuous hold on. We find a bar pretty quickly, and from there, well, we do what soldiers do when presented with downtime and hooch. And while my companions won't ever get their names on a monument, to me, they are every bit as much of a soldier as the men standing beside me in Germany were. We attract a bit of attention. I'm expecting some kind of strange hive mind mob, or maybe just good old-fashioned mistrust of strangers. But the folks, for all of their off-putting looks and random minor wounds, seemed happy to have some new people around. We talked and drank, and I found myself sharing a strange sense of camaraderie with the workers. Each had a story or two about a run-in with the things that live in this place. Each had survived, stayed, and made a good living doing it. Zeke was the first to stumble off to a half-finished hotel room, his eyes clouded with spirits. Next was Leroy, though the man wasn't pounding them back as hard as the rest of us. The last of my companions to call it a night was Sylvia, still looking stone sober, despite matching me drink for drink. I was left with a handful of employees well past sloshed, but for the first time in a long while, connecting with folks. You still feel it? Asks Anthony, a short, dark-haired man. I know what he means,
but I wave a hand at him dismissively. You do, don't you? That dime-sized tingle in the back of your mind. Anthony grins as he fills 2 water glasses halfway with whiskey. A little, I guess. Don't really like to think about what it means, I reply after a long pause and a long drink. Anthony looks around a little nervously and motions me to leave the bar. I know I'm not breaking any new ground here, but Hooch doesn't make for the best decisions. I join Anthony as he walks down a long, dark street, shadows from half-finished buildings and flickering light bulbs making me antsy. Just have to be careful who's listening, Ethan. See, some of us want to know what that feeling is, and we've figured out a way how, Anthony says. I feel the other shoe dropping. These guys must be some kind of resistance. This place can't be what it seems. I knew it. No one that goes around doing things like this is on the up and up, I reply, following Anthony down a dark alley. You're right there, chum. Arthur, he wants to enslave the residents. He tortures them, mutilates them. He wants slaves for his friend's little cartoon empire. Anthony opens up a thick metal door at the end of the alley. He closes it as we walk in, and it takes me a moment to adjust to the dim light. Once I do though, what I see makes every instinct I have scream at me to run. The rat-like thing from before sits in the center of the room, on a throne seemingly made from the same material as its barge. It looks tired, groggy, and almost hazy, like it's not quite there. To its left and right, sitting atop mounds of offal and gore, were 3 others, 3 lesser terrors, flanking their king. My mind starts to put 2 and 2 together, and I think to the creatures performing in the street. Each of the abominations in front of me seem to be a mould or archetype. The lanky rotten hound, the lurching screaming duck, and another rat, its torn, faded skirt making me think it's supposed to be female. The people milling about this meeting hall butcher shop hybrid were crazed and mutilated, engaged in acts with the entities that were either lewd, torturous, or both. My stomach churns. The humans come away from their sinful trysts bleeding and bruised. Then I feel it. That small tingle at the back of my mind turns to a faint whisper. I listen for a second, and nothing on earth could get me to repeat what I heard. Arthur wants to bring the residents back as slaves, drag these gods to the mortal realm in shackles, but you can hear them too, can't you, Ethan? Look upon the miracle, Anthony preaches. Somewhere in his labs, Arthur's scientists are trying to desecrate our god, yet still, here he sits. He is here, no absentee father from an Abrahamic fable. He nor his disciples held fast to mortal laws like time and space. Ethan, brother, you can help us. You can be one of the residents chosen. I'm so disgusted I want to plug the lot of these demon-bothering idiots. But stone cold sober, even without the living embodiment of sin right in front of me, 24 people, close quarters, with a long gun and pistol. Well, I'm a soldier, but not some kind of pulp novel hero. Discretion is the better part of valor. Tony, buddy, I've never been the kind of guy to question another man's faith, but I can't go biting the hand that feeds me. Best of luck for you and your friends, and for that matter, tell the big fella there, thanks for not killing me. But I need to be getting on my way. My tone is firm, but not confrontational. I begin to back away, and I don't like the look in Anthony's eyes. What I like even less is the misshapen rodent-like thing turning towards me.
It feels like a fishhook in my brain, a feeling strong enough to be an urge that tells me to go to it, to look upon the only true evidence of the divine I've ever seen. I resist it. I keep walking backwards. If looks could kill, I'd be dead 10 times over, but no one in the little slice of hell comes at me. I beat feet back to the hotel and have no luck in waking any of my companions, even less sleeping. I drink coffee and stare at the door to my room, rifle in hand, till Leroy comes knocking around 8 AM. He looks nearly as tired as I do. Didn't sleep, I say as we walk out of the hotel. I get paid by the second of footage. I'm looking to make enough that next time they ask me to come back, I can say no, Leroy replies. Smarter man than I am, Leroy, I say, looking around. I'm paranoid. I can't tell if the looks we are getting are curiosity or people keeping an eye on us. I begin to try and tell Leroy about last night, but a man passes with a deep gash under one eye. One of the people from the event last night. And I stay silent. Sylvia joins us, though we have to hunt down Zeke, about half a kilometre into the living forest, armed with nothing more than a scowl and a notepad. I figured this would be the best opportunity to update everyone on the cult. Then Art's little dance with the devil is over. We leave now, Sylvia says, exacerbated. She goes through a bag, and I notice that dull grey prosthetic actually has a bit of grip and mobility. I'm of the same mind. If these freaks have a plan, I can't see a better time to do it than when the big six is in town. I agree. It's about 11 in the morning by the time we get back to the half-finished park. We spend nearly an hour trying to find some sign of Art, but no dice. Either people don't know, or seem wary about telling people what the boss is up to. This isn't getting us anywhere, Leroy says, aiming his contraption at the passing creature, one of the tall, loping, dog-like things, dressed as a judge or maybe an old maid. The costume is too torn and stained to tell. An idea strikes me as the spear-wielding handler walks by. "Private!" I exclaim, my voice cutting through the piped-in music and general din of machinery and monster. "General Ethan Benson, USMC. Name, rank and serial number," I demand, lying about my rank, and doing a damn fine impression. "Private Montauk," he says, snapping to me. I'll leave his serial number out of this. Lots of nosy folk online. "We need to know the location of the primary asset of our mission," I shout, not giving the man time to think. "One Arthur Deus. Is this something you can assist?" A loud chime from a massive clock in the middle of the park begins, cutting me off. At first, I don't know what happened. My vision suddenly obscured, but then I feel heat and liquid running down my face. Look to my hands, soaked in blood. The man in front of me, the part-time private, part-time demon wrangler, clutches his throat, a long, thin dagger protruding from it. A lanky man with burn marks and a missing eye standing behind him tears the weapon brutally free. In an instant, the street erupts into violence. Gunfire can be heard, a significant portion of the employees devoted to freeing the creatures from their yokes. The cultist in front of me grins, his teeth filed and pointed. He waves a dagger, heedless of the iron on my side or the rifle on my back. All around me is a war zone, but all focus is on one man. He'll be to me before I unsling my rifle, even before I draw my pistol or knife. Being well armed is good and all, but you never want to have to draw on someone with a weapon ready. That was no good friend of mine. All I'm interested in is getting out. Whatever you're doing is between you and God. Yours or mine, I say, slowly backing towards Sylvia and the others. The man grins, then smiles, Then, of all things, skips away singing WILLIEMOUSE in an off-kilter shriek. A 5-foot, dripping, rat-like thing dressed as a construction worker runs by, chasing an employee with a blood-dripping wrench. If we go back without art, they are going to be passing out lead aspirin, I say glumly. No one disagrees. I ready my rifle. Do you have anything that could help? Zeke asks Sylvia. She smiles. These are not gods. These are shadows. And I have plenty of candles, Sylvia says, patting her bag. Leroy folds up the camera, either having enough footage or realizing that any more wouldn't be worth the distraction. Our search for Mr. Moneybags takes us on a trip through every type of horror you could think of. Some were at a distance, brutal, ritualistic killings, bodies strung up from plywood storefronts, demons screeching in forbidden tongues while committing acts never thought of by man. But others were mad scrambles, chased by one of these animal-themed horrors. Sylvia trying trinkets, balms, oils and ashes, while I tried to find some place on the creature it'd feel a bullet. We take refuge in a shop. The dozens of grinning plastic dolls around us, all themed after that vile rat, make me want to burn the place to the ground. I've got 1 magazine left, another 2 for the pistol. Then, it's going to be trying to fight these things with a trench knife and a prayer. This fucker is on his own, Leroy bursts out. I'd rather get a bullet in the back of my head than get killed by one of these things. I'm about to agree, when like a goddamned ghost, he comes out of a back corner of the establishment. And what fucker would that be? Arthur says, no ill will in his tone. Leroy looks shocked and stumbles on a reply. I don't. What the hell is this? You running some kind of cult? Some kind of body funnel for these things? I say, rage beginning to take a hold of me. My hand is on my pistol. There is no look in Art's eyes. Something off. Something wrong. And old. No, Ethan. The cult is not my doing. What is a consequence. The cost of doing business, you could say. Our goal is to see how much mundane effort we can replace with divine intervention. More work the residents put in, more profit on investment. So, for our first iteration, we let them have a fairly direct role and influence, but looks like we overshot the mark a little bit. But that's why we have pencil erasers, right? Art looks briefly at the pistol and shakes his head. These people are dying, Sylvia says. Don't you care? They did the same thing that you did. They signed a contract. Then, they let their friends brew up a cult under their noses. And now, they are reaping the consequences. But it's all data. Next round, we'll replace Willie with another prince. One a little younger. A little easier to control. We will keep it at a farther distance. Put a little more brick and mortar. A little less hocus pocus. But at the moment, you folks still have a job to do, Art explains. I've made a lot of sacrifices for the greater good, but getting Art out of this hellscape, it wasn't one of them. Resistance crumbles. What we walk through is a one-sided slaughter. Cultists, dressed in cartoonish motley, swarm around twisted avatars of evil and corporate branding. This isn't the death I've seen in war. This is the kind of slaughter last seen when plate mail and longswords were high technology. Fires rage and chants bellow from the park as we push the 6-cylinder engine of the truck to its limit. Even the trees around us seem infused with vigor and malice. I swerve to avoid grasping branches and fearless, rubbery animals trying to throw themselves in front of the automobile, all while Art sits in the back, serene and calm. We did our job, got our pay, and when it was all over, I was taken aside. Don't think I'll forget about this, Ethan. See, things are changing. War, media, information, the world. No, the universe is on the cusp of a total shift. You will be remembered. We will always have work for someone as dedicated as yourself, Art says. Buddy, this is Palooka you're never seeing again, I lie. When I look now what unfolded, I can't help but wonder how much of the resistance they ended up using when they finally brought Willie World to the public. How many of those mascot things torn from another realm of existence? How many of those songs contain a hint of the void? Enough to keep people coming back without knowing why. What I'm saying is, it's not just those old cartoons you need to worry about. This taint, this infection, is in everything they touch. Sure, the farther back you go, the more potent it gets. But if you think they suddenly saw the light, well, you haven't been paying attention. Let me know in the comments if you've seen anything like this, in the movies, in the parks, or the cartoons. As far as hearing from me again, well, I'm not the type of guy to retread the same ground too many times, but I think I have one, maybe two more stories that could help you navigate this world of the corporate being entwined with the paranormal. Tell me below if you might want to hear about a friend of mine, Peter the Sailor Man.
Hello all. Today, I went on an interesting trip. It took me a while to save up for the plane tickets, but it was worth it. Before I get into too much detail, I should introduce myself. Well, not really. I'm very paranoid when it comes to the internet, and won't disclose my real name, so just call me Delmar. I don't know what it is about that name, but I've taken to liking it recently. Okay, let's get down to business. I recently got plane tickets to Florida and booked a stay at a small hotel near a special location. It was worth the 6-hour plane ride for where I was going. If you haven't heard of it, I was planning to visit an abandoned Disney resort called Discovery Island. I did my research, and it was originally known as Treasure Island in the early 70s. The mystery behind the island is very intriguing to me, because it was shut down suddenly in '99. There was a lot of controversy behind the island, and it's commonly accepted that it was the reason behind the island's abandonment. I don't necessarily accept that as easy as others might. Don't get me wrong, I do believe it, but solely because of the fact there isn't enough information on the subject to prove it. This theory doesn't settle quite right with me. There isn't any public transportation to the island, so I had to call up a buddy to drop me off there. It had been about a day since my arrival to Florida, and I've got all of my gear ready. I brought a notebook for taking quick notes, a laptop for typing down documents, a vintage map of the island, which I discovered on the internet, a GPS, and a geocache. If I was going to an abandoned Disney park, I was going to hide a geocache there. I was going to bring a camera, but had spent all of my money on the plane tickets and hotel reservation. I hopped into his boat and we were off. The warm Florida air swerved past my temple and into the roots of my hair, relaxing me. This all went away as soon as the island entered my line of sight. I can't explain it. It was a strange mixture of happiness, excitement, and dread. I couldn't explain to you why I felt dread, but I did. I also noticed the air got thicker as we reached the island. I told myself it must be the humidity, but in hindsight, that wouldn't really make much sense. The change was too quick. It wasn't gradual enough to be natural. Ignoring it, my buddy pressed on towards the island. Strange. He didn't seem to comment on the things I've noticed. We arrived at the island. Finally, after all of the research, I'll finally be able to expose to the world what really happened at this mysterious island. Well, if I find anything to expose, that is. After stepping off his boat, I felt a sense of satisfaction. All of my hard work had led up to this. I waved goodbye to my friend as he left me to my own devices. I looked around for any landmarks. After finding one, I figured out where I was on the map and headed off to where I thought the most plausible places to find information were. The first place I had in mind was the information booth. By the looks of the entrance, this definitely was a Disney park. It was very well crafted and detailed. Most of the display looked sun-damaged and a bit cracked. Some of it, you could say, looked sand-blasted. Well, I guess the years of wear and tear from the unforgiving Florida weather took its toll. I continued until I reached what looked like the information booth. The sign was faded and the paint was chipping. It was hanging by a nail, and it obscured my view of the inside. I slid it out of the way. Inside was a perfectly normal information booth, as expected. There was an eggshell white desk with an assortment of tickets on it. It even had some pamphlets mixed in. Taking the liberty of grabbing one of the pamphlets, I ran over to the nearest bench and laid it out. Also faded and water damaged, I deciphered as much of the text as I could and typed it into a Word document. I noticed something funny, though. I had internet connection. This place was closed in the 90s. Why would there be free Wi-Fi here? Even if I could explain why there was Wi-Fi, why did I connect without my knowledge? I didn't have auto-connect on or anything. I checked the router name and the IP. The router name was Radio Nick. It didn't display an IP. It seemed to work fine. My internet browser was functioning perfectly. I shrugged it off and decided to take this opportunity to do a little more research. Didn't find anything that I didn't already know. I continued to copy down the contents of the pamphlet. Finishing, I packed up my laptop and continued my journey. It was starting to get dark, which was strange. It was only 2, according to my laptop. I called up my buddy and he came to pick me up. I asked him what time it usually got dark in Florida. He told me around this time of year, which was June, by the way. The sun set roughly 8 to 8:30. Perplexed, I opened up my laptop to see the time, and it was in fact 8:30. It literally said 2 o'clock 10 minutes ago. Don't freak yourself out, I told myself. It was probably just that sketchy router you connected to that messed up your time. Probably set to the wrong time zone or something. We arrived to shore, and I took my rental car to the hotel. After typing this up, it's really put into perspective how weird it really was. I'll pick up my exploration tomorrow. I have about 4 more days on my reservation, and I'm planning on making the best of them. That island is hiding something. Something big. I cannot think of any logical explanation of what I have witnessed today. I feel impure. That's the only word that comes to mind when describing what I feel. Something unholy has to have happened on that island, and I feel it's my duty to find out. Okay, before I get into what happened, let me level with you for a second. Here's the information I've got. Remember in the last post, when I told you to call me Delmar? You most likely thought that was a completely random name, and in all honesty, I thought so too. Remember the name of that mysterious Wi-Fi signal I was getting? It was Radio Nick. Those two names are linked. I dug a little deeper into the story of the island, and I found out the original owner of the island was a man by the name of Delmar Nicholson. His nickname was Radio Nick. I couldn't find any records on him, but I did get some information after interviewing some of the locals. They said he was a reclusive type. He seemed to have a dark cloud hovering over him at all times. He was antisocial and didn't talk to anybody. I have even heard some claims that he was, get this, satanic. Freaking satanic. That's a comforting thought while roaming around the island previously owned by a freaking Satanist. But I have heard other claims that he was a Wiccan. Other people said he was a combination of both, or as they described it, a Wiccan that believes in the power of Satan. Just keep that in mind when you're reading what happened to me. I had just arrived on the island. You could say I was a little uneasy, kind of on edge, armed with the new information. I still got that same feeling of dread as the day before, only this time it felt more sad than anything. I still entered the park, determined to find out about this whole Radio Nick thing. I planned my route the night before. My first stop was the Explorer's Outpost. Judging by the name, it was a sort of employee area. I couldn't find any info on it, but I was going to trust my gut. I headed up to the dock and took a left. There was a building with a thatch roof that had splintered from the storms since the closing, and walls made out of various wooden sticks, most of them snapped in half. A small sign stood out front. Explorer's Outpost. I think I'm in the right place. Before proceeding inside, I looked up and remembered the position of the sun. I walked through what was left of the deteriorating front door into a tropical room. It had an information desk and some benches. All of the ropes used to form lines had fallen over, and the door leading to behind the desk was blown apart, more so than most of the room. It was as if something forced its way into the back. I proceeded with caution into the back room. There was a room with a bunch of filing cabinets inside. Most of them hung open, and half of the files were on the floor. The corner in particular was very dark, almost unnaturally dark. But something about it made me freeze. Something turned its head around, and its eyes reflected the light coming in the room. The eyes lunged at me. The light revealed it was a vulture. It stopped short of my face, and instead of attacking me, it hovered while waving its wings at me, as if shooing me away. I fell on my back, and the vulture landed on the ground below it. It bowed its head at me. My heart was racing a mile a minute, but that gesture made me feel safe. It looked up at me and pointed its beak towards a cabinet. It tapped its beak on the face of the cabinet. It read real estate. I opened up the cabinet as the vulture watched. Only about 5 folders are present. I take them. The vulture waves its wings. Okay, you've got my attention. It taps its beak on another cabinet. It was the employee records. I take those as well. To my surprise, I turn around for more instructions, and the vulture was gone. I didn't hear it fly away or anything. It was just gone. I wouldn't say I fled the island, though I briskly walked at a pace you could compare to running in fear. I sat at the dock and waited for my buddy to come and pick me up. When he arrived, I was so relieved, but as soon as I stepped onto the boat, this overwhelming feeling of fear and dread overcame me, and I felt really dizzy. I fell over into my buddy's arms, and he drove me home. He's a good friend. I took it easy from there. I still feel really uneasy and sad about, well, I don't know. I feel constricted for some reason, as if there's something looming over me, something that I couldn't control. Well, despite my mental condition, I'm still looking into what happened on that island. I should probably start looking through those papers. See you all soon. Guys, this is going to be a very short post, but this is the information I got. It perfectly correlates with what happened yesterday. I was looking through those employee records, and my suspicions have been confirmed. That Radio Nick guy was a huge Satanist. The employee summary says after the island was sold to Disney corporations, Radio Nick, we'll call him Nicholson, applied as an employee after the island construction was completed. They assumed it was because he couldn't bear to leave his beloved island. In the first couple of years, he acted normally, but in his later years, just before the closing, other employees noticed a change in his behaviour. Every day, like clockwork, he walked into the jungle by the South American aviary section, not to be seen for a couple of hours. His superiors continually told him this behaviour affected his workflow. This eventually led to his termination. Interestingly enough, the employee's summary just abruptly ends there, but handwritten after the end of the summary was some Russian text. It took me half an hour to decipher the individual symbols, and I finally translated it online to the words, "Lucifer's foul game." This astonished me, and left me a bit confused. I analysed what it could mean, and I've come to the conclusion that this whole thing has to do with birds. The vultures were the key. I've read up that in some cultures, the vulture is considered a symbol of good. It makes me think that these vultures are trying to protect me from something, as well as exposing the truth. I also have read that there was a controversy connected to the vultures that took place when the park was still active. Disney employees were killing vultures because they said they were endangering the avian life on the island. I think the vultures were trying to get rid of the birds because they were connected to something evil. Or someone. Someone by the name of Radio Nick. That's all I've got so far in terms of theories. So if any of you have any critique to my theory, or any information that could help, please don't hesitate to contact me. I should also note that I used all my food money to buy a digital camera. Nothing fancy, it's actually quite cheap. I'll be sending pictures if I can. I'll be leaving for the island soon. Wish me luck.
Hey guys, this is quote-unquote Delmar's friend. I'm the one who's been boating him back and forth from the island. I have some weird news for you guys. Delmar is currently incapacitated and incapable of getting a post out. He's out cold on his hotel bed right now, and he's been having night terrors. All I really know is that he's getting tenser every time I talk to him there. In the most recent ride I gave him, he tried to pass off one of those dollar store disposable digital cameras that's something to use on a vacation. I let him borrow my camera, and he graciously accepted. After leaving, I was the only one in the house for 15 minutes before receiving a text from him. The text said, "Come on now," and I raced to my car. When I arrived at the island, I found him face down, out like a light on the ground. After falling to wake him up, I just carried him on the boat and brought him to the hospital. The doctor said he was okay. At first though, he was knocked out with a concussion, but they were examining him and found nothing wrong. They just prescribed him rest, so I did just that. I know this blog is important to him, so I thought it would be right if I posted something while he was unavailable. Just wanted to update for you who follow this blog. He should be awake by tomorrow.
I'm done. I'm done. I am never setting foot on that island again. I just got home from Florida. I waited a while before typing this post, for the sake of my sanity. Let me explain what happened. I just woke up, and I don't remember anything. My buddy was there, and he explained what he saw happen. We talked for a while, before he left because he had errands to run. I got comfy on my bed and turned on the TV. The TV illuminated the room, and I noticed the camera that my buddy let me borrow. I guess he forgot it. I get out of bed and pick it up and turned it on to see if I should charge the battery. It's common courtesy. It was then I noticed that there was only a couple of minutes left on the tape. He gave me a blank tape with about 2 hours of footage on it. That means I recorded something. That's impossible though, since I had only been on the island for about half an hour. A morbid curiosity overcame me, and I decided to plug it in and watch it. It started with me waving goodbye to my buddy. I began my hike through the island. The video cut to me at the aviary section of the island. Keep in mind that I don't remember any of this. I was looking around for anything that might answer some questions. I headed for the maintenance area behind the bird exhibits. I closed the door behind me, being the genius I am. It was somewhat dark in there, light enough so you can see, but dark enough to make you feel uncomfortable. It was a room full of bags of birdseed, some ripped open and spilled on the floor. There was a bucket in the corner, from what I can see, with some scrapers next to it. I could only guess what that's for. I continued on into a dim room, when I find a room with a bunch of pedestals, scattered on the floor. It seems like they were ripped off something, and hastily thrown into a back room. I put down the camera near the AC unit, and I watched myself pick one of them up. I look surprised and a bit scared. I showed the camera the face of the pedestal. It was one of those information pedestals that taught you about the bird it was showcasing. It had an upside-down pentagram burned on it. I paused the tape to clear my head, after which I continued, bracing for the worst. I picked up another one and showed this one to the camera. An upside-down cross with what appears to be a crude Mickey Mouse nailed to it. I put it down slowly, but a bang made me freeze. I stood there for about 10 seconds before something made me grab the camera and run. The video cut to me walking around outside. It was dark now. Using a flashlight to lead the way, I briskly walked through the park. It was eerily quiet. The only sounds I could hear were heavy breathing and quiet footsteps. This continued for about 10 minutes. The video cut again. This time, I was in what appeared to be a bathroom. I was kneeling on the ground, facing the side of the stall. I was leaning on it, as if I was being deprived of strength. I turned around towards the camera, and started to softly sob. I was feeling uneasy watching this, as I don't normally cry. After a bit of sobbing, a female-sounding voice in the distance simply stated, "Stop," in a firm voice. I did as she commanded. I hesitated for a bit, and, without warning, I punched a hole through the hard plastic stall wall and began to scream before the video cut to a new scene. This time, I was in a security room. All of the TVs were functioning perfectly. They were all displaying different parts of the island. People were hustling and bustling around the exhibits and displays. The camera zoomed in on the date displayed in the corner. All I could get out of it was TH 1999. I believed it to be the date of the park closing. It showed there was a man that climbed over the railing into the jungle. The security feed began to fast forward and stopped after 10 seconds of fast forwarding. What I saw next, I couldn't get out of my mind. All of the people in all of the feeds were covering their ears and bending over in agony. The only people that weren't were the employees, who started to show alarm. I couldn't understand why. If everybody except me and my co-workers began to act like that, I would panic too. They tried things from shaking people to hitting them. Nothing got them to respond. One of the employees stood up, shouted something at the other employees, and started to run away with them, as if away from something. I soon realized what that was, when a black mist rolled over the island visitors at a surprising rate. It didn't even seem like mist, just a black mass that consumed the camera's view. I stopped the security feed and backed away to show all of the TVs. Just then, a soft voice spoke from behind. "Hello?" The camera swerves around to see Snow White staring blankly into the camera. "Have you met Nick yet?" She undergoes a gruesome transformation. Her sockets turn a dark black, and veins around her eyes splintered out from the center. Her eyes turned white, and she violently cocked her head to the side with a loud crunch. Her jaw dropped and almost touched her shoulder as she let out what sounded like a scream. It was so loud it distorted the audio. She put her arm straight out in front of her and lunged for the camera before it cut again. I was wandering through what appeared to be a plaza sort of place. I, every once in a while, peered into one of the displays or snack bars. Every time, I would find another pentagram burnt into the ground on the inside. My silence worries me. Whispering became audible, but it was multiple voices. "Get out of my footsteps became paired with another, and another, and so on. My walk became a brisk jog, and I stopped checking in the displays. I was tempted to stop the video, but I gathered my courage and pressed on. I abruptly stopped in place, while the whispering and the footsteps grew louder. I quickly turned around to find nothing, while the whispering and footsteps stopped. I let out a pained sigh of relief, or at least, that's what it sounded like. I turned back around again to be greeted by Mickey Mouse. He said, "Have you met Nick yet?" Mickey began to violently shake, after which his eyes exploded, sending entrails and blood spewing out of his eye sockets. I hear a scream from an unknown voice. Then, halfway through the explosion, the video cuts again. It was lighter out. Blood was splattered on the camera, but only a little bit. I was sobbing again, but I was holding the camera and walking through the woods. The camera jerked forward and I almost dropped it. The camera pointed down to the ground, where an arm was sticking out of the ground, grabbing my ankle. I pulled away, and I pulled the rest of the body that belonged to the arm out with it. It was a sickly version of a Mowgli, the protagonist from the Jungle Book. He looked grey, and strangely had more contrast than the rest of the shot. His hair had fallen out, leaving only a couple of dangling strands. I started to scream for help. I dropped the camera, showing a shot of multiple Mowglis climbing on the trees. They were all barking and yelling. My foot had just escaped the camera's view as all of the Mowglis pounced onto me, also escaping the camera's view. After that, it got quiet. The camera sat there for roughly 30 seconds. Re-entering view, I stood up and picked up the camera I walked through the jungle for a while until I got to a cliff. I had to jump over a railing to get to it. I placed the camera down and walked towards the edge of the cliff, leaned over the edge, and fell. I'm done. I'm done asking questions. I'm done being curious. I'm done looking for answers. I'm done. I refuse to analyze anything I saw on that tape. I refuse to further explore the topic. I'm done with this blog. This will be my last post. I know this may be an anticlimactic ending, but honestly, I couldn't care. Feel free to speculate and discuss any theories on this. Just know that I will not be answering any questions. No, I will not provide the video. I'm not wasting my time digitalizing it. The only thing I will provide is this picture I found on my digital camera that I bought. Goodbye all. I'm done. I'm done.
So, a couple of years back, my buddies and I tried to stay in the park after closing time. Our plan was to just take pictures, nothing sinister or anything like that. We just wanted to be able to say we did it, you know? Basically, we snuck from bathroom to bathroom, corner to corner, and managed to stay there until they closed the gates and the maintenance team got to work. We were really surprised we hadn't gotten caught. It was almost strange, considering how much talking up Disney security gets. Our hearts were beating like crazy, and we sat there for a while, hiding behind a tombstone by the haunted mansion. We noticed that it's true. The Disney staff had signed their names on every single one. So, finally, we got the courage to roam about, still being careful not to be seen. It was really eerie. The occasional guard or maintenance worker would walk by, and we would just duck or hide behind a corner. It worked. For about half an hour. Of course, we didn't keep this up for long. And yeah, they caught us. I mean, give us props for even attempting and succeeding, but that's not where the story ends. So, the first thing they said when they caught us was, "Are you going down to the dungeon?" And we laughed. The security guard chuckled too, so the mood wasn't too dreary. He told us we weren't the first people to try to sneak in after hours, but he wanted to know how we did it. We explained the situation, and he actually laughed and said that wasn't a bad plan. He told us he had to take us to Disney jail to be further interrogated, which we thought was odd, but we figured from the beginning that if we had gotten caught, they'd take us down there. It might have been our plan all along. Maybe we wanted to see the Disney Catacombs more than we wanted to be in the park after hours. So he called for more workers to come and help him escort us, and we went on our way towards Toontown. Then they took us down in this elevator, right into hell. The first thing we noticed was how expensive looking the elevator was. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's hard to explain. It was like a stainless steel interior with mirrors all around, and the floor was this tacky red carpeting, but it looked expensive. There were only 2 buttons in this elevator, not counting the emergency buttons. One said up, and the other said down. I had forgotten to mention, they never handcuffed us or zip-tied our hands. They just kind of walked beside us, expecting we'd follow. Not that we would have tried to make a run for it. I mean, these people seemed decent. Like, how were we supposed to know what was going to happen? The elevator stopped, and we started walking down this perfectly shining, bleach-smelling corridor. There were no doors on either side. It was just a plain, empty corridor. We walked for what seemed like an eternity, and no one was talking any longer. It was me, my friends, the security guard, and 2 other maintenance workers. Finally, we reached a heavy metal door that had a security code and a card reader. One worker put his card in, the other typed a code on the keypad. I watched the code he typed in. 121566. I only remember it because I found out later what its significance was, and it made me laugh looking back. Strange. It's strange that I could laugh looking back. They led me and my friends into another corridor. This one had doors down the hallway walls. Each door had a little plexiglass square, a 10 by 10 inch window at the top right corner. Looked sort of like a psych ward, to be honest. Not much so like a jail. He led us to room 1901, and inside was a single desk with, surprisingly, 3 chairs for me and each of my friends. They left us in there alone, closing the door on the way out. We sat in the chairs like obedient little children and waited for them to return, but they never did. 2 hours went by, and no one came back for us. My buddy Tim went to the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. He didn't open it though. He was worried there'd be a guard on the outside, and that they'd think we were escaping, and we weren't looking for any more trouble. So about 25 minutes went by, when we got restless, and finally decided to leave the room. The hallway was empty, like before. No signs of people. Nothing. We started calling out, "Hello? Is anybody here?" No one answered our calls. We noticed surveillance cameras were placed above every door, and we got to wondering if there was any living soul in this place at all. We should have left right there and then, but then again, whoever does the right thing in these kinds of situations? Every door looked the same, and each one had a specific number above it. They weren't in order like, say, rooms 1 to 10. They were scattered numbers. For example, our room had been 1901, but the door next to it was 1205. We got to thinking, and finally assumed that they were just randomly chosen. When we walked up that hallway, we had no idea where we were going. what we were hoping to find, or even if it mattered. My other buddy, Guy, decided we should just leave. He said that if they really wanted us here, they'd have come back, and maybe it was just a scare tactic. Maybe they just wanted to trick us into thinking we were being arrested and were waiting on the outside to laugh. I felt wary of the whole situation, and Tim was just quiet the whole time, nodding his head here and there. He was more interested in looking into the door's little 10 by 10 inch windows. That wasn't a good idea. I tried to tell him, but of course, no one listened to reason when they're freaked out, and we were definitely freaked the fuck out at this point. The cameras above the doors were capable of motion detection and followed us as we wandered down the desolate corridor, a little red light on the bottom of the lens, blinking each second. No noise filled the air. All we heard was each other breathing. Then it happened. We had reached the end of the hallway. Unfortunately, the door at the end had another pin code reader. I tried the pin from before, the one I saw them type in, but it was invalid. At that moment, the lights in the hallway shut off, and we heard the doors. God damn it. I can still hear them to this day. The fucking doors opened, all lining up along the corridor. They made a subtle creak, and then a boom as they hit the wall beside them with force. As I said, after I entered the invalid code into the keypad, the lights shut off and the doors opened, except for the door with the keypad. We also noticed, as the doors opened, each doorway had a little bit of light seeping from its open pathway. We stood there, stunned, for a good 5 minutes, not knowing what to do. We figured we tripped some alarm, and that this was just a protocol, a standard drill, in case of an attempted escape. What were we supposed to think? So we just turned in the other direction, away from the locked door. A sense of panic hit all three of us for some reason, and we got the urge to run. No one agreed to running. It was just like we all knew we had to, at the same time. Some sort of instinct, like a baby gazelle knowing when to run from a lion. We were in a lion's den, all right. It wasn't until about the 10th door we passed that we began to look into the doorways as we passed them. Standing at the doorways were people in costume. We were running past Donald's, Mickey's, Goofy's, Pluto's, all different kinds of Disney characters. It was insane, and we screamed at the top of our lungs. I know they say never look behind you as you run, but I did. They were leaving the rooms and following us. Not running, just casually walking towards us. I think that is what made it so much more terrifying. Almost like they knew we had nowhere to go. Now, I don't know if it was all in my head, just from sheer panic and fear of the moment, but I swear I could swear on my mother's life, I heard It's a Small World playing over an intercom. I have a fear of dolls, and the ride always gave me the creeps my whole life. Now, I could see them, the little robotic dolls, standing in the doorways as we passed. Still following were the costumed characters. The dolls weren't chasing us, thank God. I would have died from a heart attack if I had seen the dolls following suit, but they didn't. It didn't make the situation all that better. I mean, how many times have you been followed by a group of costumed individuals, seemingly out to fucking eat you alive? At least, that's what I told myself to keep myself moving. Stopping meant being devoured by fucking Donald Duck. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go out like that. Tim was crying, Guy was sweating and breathing heavily, and I just kept turning my head to see if we were being followed. And, of course, we were. I'm not sure how many doors we had passed at this point, or if there really were different characters at each door, but I knew that this hallway had to end at some point, and we were getting the fuck out of this place pronto. Easier said than done. I looked back after another minute or two of running, and noticed there was nothing behind us anymore that we could see. I heard footsteps, but figured we had gotten so far ahead, and they were just still walking casually, like before. The hallway was still going on for what seemed like forever, and Guy needed to stop, or he was going to faint from exhaustion. The door beside us was open, with the light on, but nothing inside. I decided we would hide in there till we caught our breath, and we could continue onward. As we closed the door behind us, I noticed it was room 1966. Again, that meant nothing at the time. Tim was pacing the room. Guy was laying on the floor, still breathing pretty hard, and I was at the window. Looking out, I saw nothing. No music. No, nothing. It was dark out, and hard to tell for sure, but I figured I would have seen figures, or shadows, or something. Still, I kept watch. After 15 minutes or so, Guy said he was good to go. Tim was the only one smart enough to pull out his new Razr cell phone. No signal, of course. He opened the door subtly, quietly, but heard no footsteps. Nothing was following us anymore, but we weren't taking chances. We got back to running. It only took us another 7 minutes to reach the door, give or take. It had no keypad, and it was open. We entered the corridor from before, and thank God, there were no doors. We ran for the elevator and got in, pushed the up button, and stood there, looking at each other, dumbfounded as to what had just happened. None of us spoke. We just waited till the elevator opened back into Toontown and started making our way for the front gate. We kept a low profile, using the same duck and hide technique that had gotten us this far from the get-go. Maintenance workers and security guards were still about, but we couldn't take any more chances. Finally, Tim lost it and took off in a sprint. I couldn't imagine what had set him off, until I looked and saw that everyone in the park just stood there, staring at us with blank faces. We heard a voice over the intercom explaining that 3 fugitives had escaped from captivity and needed to be escorted back to the jails below. We booked it. Catching up to Tim, costumed characters appeared from the shadows, workers and guards chasing after us. Everyone was sprinting for us. I couldn't see well, but I imagined drool dripping from their jowls. They wanted us back down there. We had escaped, and they were pissed. The gate was just up ahead. The creepiest thing about it all was that, besides the voice over the intercom, the park was dead silent. No chat from the workers could be heard. Even now, as we were running for what we assumed was our lives, from the characters, the workers, the guards, no one bothered to shout after us. No one yelled. No one said stop. Just footsteps and the occasional cough from Guy. As we made it past the front gates, we didn't stop until we got to the parking lot. Our car was gone, and we were left scratching our heads. We continued running down the road, which went on for miles, occasionally stopping for us to catch our breath. We made it to a little corner store where Tim used his cell phone to call a taxi cab. When it finally arrived, we took the cab back to the hotel we were staying at, paid the fare, and went up to our rooms. In the end, the next day, we got a call from the hotel's front desk, so we headed downstairs. There were officers waiting for us. They said that our car had been impounded and we needed to pay the fine. They didn't ask us any other questions, and we didn't bother telling the police anything that happened. Even now, on this random board, people who don't have reason to disbelieve me don't believe me. So how could an officer of the law be expected to? We didn't bother. We simply paid the fine and drove home. We didn't talk about what happened the whole drive back. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I got myself to search up the numbers. Curiosity, I guess. As you all know, Walt Disney was born December 5th, 1901. The room we were in was 1901. The door next to it was 1205. Also, he died December 15th, 1966, which was the key code the worker had put in to lead us to the main corridor. What a strange coincidence, I decided. Whether any of that was real at all, I couldn't tell you. Maybe our imaginations ran wild. We were tired. It was around 1 AM when we made our escape, so it's plausible that's the answer. I'll never forget it though, and I haven't been back since.
Everyone loves Walt Disney. His stories and animations have warmed the hearts of countless audiences around the world for generations. That's the side of him they wanted you to see. I worked 3 years in Burbank, California as a digital archivist for the Walt Disney Company. I can't give my name here because just me writing this
is breaking half a dozen NDAs that they made me sign before I was let go from the company. My job was to oversee conversion and restoration of film prints into digital format. Because there was rarely anything new to come out of the vault, I found the majority of my time on the clock was spent doing digital cleanups of repertory titles. They'd made us huddle over already sifted through footage to pick up specks of dirt from films like Cinderella or Snow White. That was so when people bought yet another re-release on Blu-ray, they'd think they was getting their money's worth. That all changed when I heard that half a dozen film canisters had been discovered in the basement of one of Disney's many vacation properties. There were 13 canisters, all of them labelled with their titles. The majority were old, unseen Mickey Mouse shorts, nothing new or original. One of the canisters, however, was unmarked. I ran the film through a projector. The year 1944 appeared on the screen, and then the title read, Walt Disney's The Final Solution. What followed was a beautifully animated cartoon in full colour and sound. The animation was unlike anything Disney had ever made before or after. Instead of cartoonish characters with comically exaggerated features, I was looking at near photorealistic renderings moving with lifelike fluidity. There was no music, only a low humming sound that almost played melodically in unison with the images. I can remember every frame of the cartoon like it was just yesterday. The story was about a man named Dr. Disney. He was a scientist working for the government who had come to a drastic conclusion. Mankind was a sickness, a pox on the planet, a hateful parasite that could never be cured of its own shortcomings. After an unauthorized experiment involving 2 eventually confiscated chipmunks, the doctor was court-martialed and publicly shamed for his extreme scientific methods. Alone, broken, and on the cusp of poverty, the doctor would soon be approached by a Russian spy who had explained that, over the years, the KGB had been spying on him. The doctor's scientific achievements being the subject of much study in Russia. The cartoon continues, with Russia secretly bankrolling the doctor, allowing him to continue his experiments in a hidden, underground laboratory containing the most cutting-edge technology. This was all under the strict conditions that his completed work would be the property of the Soviets. Deep in the laboratory, the doctor began steps that, when finished, would change the unsuspecting world above him forever. The doctor meticulously crafted his perfect creation, manipulating the DNA of a common mouse into a 5-foot, upright-standing vessel of sentience. The doctor would name this metaphorical Adam Mickey. Mickey would be the first new race that would one day replace humans as the stewards of Earth. Walt would affectionately dub these new beings anthropomorphs. In the following weeks, Mickey would learn and comprehend at a nearly impossible rate. Mickey would eventually utilize this newfound intelligence to assist the Doctor in the creation of 2 more anthropomorphs, a duck that would be named Donald, and a dog that would be named Goofy. The Doctor would pass his moral values onto the trio, constantly teaching Mickey, Donald, and Goofy about the folly of mankind and how it could all be changed for the better. The Doctor would keep his creations hidden from the Russian higher-ups, buying time by telling the KGB he was working on a bioweapon, codenamed Fantasia, that, when used, would wipe out not only the Americans, but anyone else who didn't represent the best interests of the Soviet Union. This weapon, as he continued to explain, would carry on the winds, travel around the entire world, killing those not inoculated with the cure. The doctor delivers the Russians both the super weapon, Fantasia, as well as the means to administer the cure to every man, woman and child that the Russians deemed worthy of saving. The Russians deployed the doctor's doomsday weapon. Fantasia spreads across the globe, killing billions in a matter of days, including the Russians themselves. The cure the doctor claimed to develop never existed. The human race is soon erased from existence. It's revealed that Fantasia would have a secondary purpose. While deadly to humans, the compound would mutate all animals that came into direct contact. Anthropomorphs are now the dominant species on the planet. This is shown in a montage that plays like something from a horror movie due to the animation's realism. Deep in the underground lab, the doctor is isolated from the effects of Fantasia. He spends his final moments with Mickey, saying, "Remember what I've taught you. When I'm gone, they'll look up to you for leadership. All of them. Learn from our mistakes so that you never make them yourselves." Mickey is confused, thinking that the doctor would see this new world he was responsible for creating. The doctor tells the saddened Mickey that he has no place in that world. It no longer belongs to him. After an emotional goodbye to his protégés, Mickey, Donald and Goofy know what must be done. Using their enhanced strength, the three rip the doctor's body to bloody shreds, then take turns consuming the gory chunks to acquire the last of his wisdom. Mickey, Goofy and Donald escape to the surface, where they are surrounded by hundreds of newly turned anthropomorphs. They're lost, they're confused, they're scared. Mickey tells them not to fear, as he takes his place as shepherd to this new flock that's looking for guidance. We see a montage of a society being reborn. Mickey is declared all-powerful leader of Disney World. Donald and Goofy take their place at Mickey's side as his counsel. The anthropomorphs assume control over the already established human infrastructure, using their shared intelligence to improve on technology, once thought to be on the fringes of cutting edge. Even in this age of enlightenment, the anthropomorphs regard Dr. Disney with the reverence of a god. A religion is formed based on what was able to be pieced together from his past. They erect monuments, statues, and churches to worship the man who gave them all life. The effects of Fantasia are not without their drawbacks. While most animal species on the planet have evolved, there are those who have a genetic resistance to the change. This 20% of the animal population lives in harmony with their biologically advanced kin. They are named the Elder Ones. Some continue to live in the wild, others live as pets. The cartoon finally ends with Mickey taking one of these animals in. A familiar orange dog. The end fades up on the screen as Mickey and Pluto walk off into the sunset. I was oblivious to the fact my nose had been bleeding continuously as I watched the cartoon. Seconds later, the room started spinning and everything went black. When I came to, the lab was in ruins. Machines were smashed and streaks of blood stained the walls. Looking down at my trembling hands, I could see that they were covered in deep gashes. Not long after waking up, I would be escorted off the premises by security. I was let go soon after sabotaging company property. It was very formal, and they chose not to press charges. The blackouts would continue for months after my termination. When I eventually did go to the hospital, they discovered I have stage 4 brain cancer. I know with every fibre of my being that I'm now sick from watching that cartoon. The doctors say that I don't have long left, that I should make the best of my remaining time. I wish I could. I really do. But I can't stop thinking about what I saw that night. I can't stop wondering what Disney originally planned to do with that cartoon. I hope to God that they destroy it, because I know now, in these final moments of my life, that cartoon wasn't named the final solution. It was the final solution.
Three circles, a combination of shapes we've all come to know and love as Mickey Mouse, or H2O if you're a geek. But where did it all start? I'm sure you've all heard the story. A Mr. Walt Disney was working for Universal at the time, animating cartoons for a character by the name of Oswald, and was plucked from his job by his employers. Time went by, and he was eventually struck back with his own creation, giving life to a cultural phenomenon. But what if I told you that Mickey wasn't the first concept Walt had come up with for his newfound phenomenon? Now, of course, some of you Disney enthusiasts might be typing away at your keyboards that a much chubbier mouse by the name of Mortimer was the first one. Well, I hate to break it to you, but no, he wasn't. The first concept is never finished. That's the case with every known artist that animates their cartoons. A figure is drawn, given time, scrapped. Another is drawn, given more time. Then it is at that point where there is an option for it to be scrapped or not. This is where Mortimer came into existence. He was the figure that was given more time and detail, but unfortunately, the option that was chosen for him was to be scrapped. But what of his first figure? Well, no one outside of this blog post really knows for certain, but there were drawings that suggest this character had to be something more unsettling than the mouse that exists today. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Walt Disney sat down and drew a mouse pulling his own damn head off. Though, I have to say, that would be pretty cool to see, as an artist who actually draws macabre-based material. But no, because instead of drawing said character beheading themselves, Walt chose to draw this specific character out of several tremendous emotions he was experiencing at that point in time. This character he gave a little nickname to as Bub. Now Bub wasn't particularly scary in terms of appearance. Now any artist that views stories such as these on a site like this will recreate a given character to meet more of a nightmarish quota. It really confuses others into thinking a character looks one way, when in reality, it looks completely different. But I'm losing my main focus here. Again, Bub wasn't exactly an unnerving creature due to his appearance. In fact, he looked almost as friendly as you could possibly imagine. But, as most people say, there are dark secrets that lie under the brightest smiles. He had some of those secrets, which were whispered to another through drawings. And these drawings weren't exactly easy to get to. According to a source I came across a while back, which has since been removed, apparently, you had to be chosen by Walt Disney himself to view these certain sketches, but he never gave them to you himself. They would always just show up in the oddest of places, mostly due to the fact he probably couldn't look at you with a straight face if he knew out of certainty that you saw them. so that was part of the mystery. But why would Walt want people to see these drawings if he couldn't bear the knowledge of someone actually seeing them? Well, because that was his call for help, or rather, whisper for help. Either way, it was never answered. This call for help that I'm referring to is in regards to Walt's mental health. Bub was not a relatively friendly creature, although he looked quite the opposite. Bub had some issues which were scribbled onto the paper where he was drawn, each with a different emotion. Now, as for his appearance, Bub wasn't a short, chubby being with a can-do attitude, like Mortimer or Mickey. Instead, he was a tall, skinny, almost famished creature with something close to a permanent smile etched onto his face, although he would frown from time to time if the contents of the paper were anything close to upsetting for the artist himself. This goes back to when I stated that Walt had a sort of call for help due to his mentality. Everything he wrote next to this creature never particularly changed his mood drastically. They were always more along the lines of vents than anything else. However, there would be instances where the contents of the paper would affect his behavior the day after. This was not often, though when it occurred, he was very off in terms of activity. Of course, he was upset. That I've already stated. However, when he did what he did while in this mood was a different story. But I won't get into that, because that strays too far off the path I'm on right now. However, I will say this. He created a mask for himself. This mask was Bub's face, and he would always wear it around the facility where he worked when in these particular moods. But that's all I'll say. As for the contents on the paper, well, read for yourself. Paper number 1. I've never felt anything like this before, and it's not a happy feeling. These were written alongside a sketch of Bub, sitting with his legs crossed, facing a wall with an intense amount of shading. Paper number 2. I strive to make others feel happy. Why don't I feel it myself? This was written alongside a sketch of Bub, clasping his hands around his head, along with a nervous expression on his face. Paper number 3. I've been losing sleep as of yesterday, and I don't understand what's happening to me. I don't feel right. These were the words written alongside a sketch of Bub lying down, with his hands under his head and his eyes open, along with crossed out Z's seemingly floating above his head. Paper number 4. I want to laugh and smile for real, even if it's just once. And will you do it for me? This was written alongside a sketch of Bub, stretching out his smile, exposing multiple elongated teeth, along with several haars surrounding him. Paper number 5. You're useless. I'm getting nowhere with you. I need proper help. This was written alongside a sketch of Bub, with an arrow pointing to his head and X's over his eyes. These were the only drawings I could find and document. But there was one more I forgot to mention. Do you remember when I stated that Bub was a rather friendly looking being, and that he wasn't created with a dark intention? Well, that last part is true. But as for the first part, I lied. For those who would never have known, Bub was an abbreviation for another name, a name for the devil. How something with a name meaning devil being created with good intention is beyond my comprehension. I just don't know, but this last drawing shows that whatever intention Walt had went straight out of the window. It describes Bub as what his name originated as. Have a read. Paper number 6. Beelzebub was written over and over again in messy ink, covering almost every blank inch of the harshly smudged paper, alongside a sketch of a colourless demon bearing a tremendous smile. Unsettling, is it not? Well, lucky for you. As I stated before, this was Walt's first concept, meaning it was inevitably scrapped. And for good reason, obviously. Can't make cartoons for little tykes with the goddamn devil as the main protagonist. In any case, as unsettling as all of this may be, which I humbly apologise for, I couldn't have nerfed this. It needed to be said for the sake of anyone who ever happens to come across this creature for any reason whatsoever. Because, like I said, these drawings still exist. Who knows what would happen to them if they were to fall into the wrong hands. I think it's safe to say most Americans have either been to Disneyland or Disney World. I have been to Disney World in Orlando twice now. The first time I went, I was 10 years old. Me and my family had just returned from our second trip as a family 10 years later. We went during February, so it was relatively quiet in all the parks. We did go to all 4 parks. We started with the Hollywood Studios, then Epcot, then the Animal Kingdom, and then finally, Magic Kingdom. I had a great time, until I went on Splash Mountain. Splash Mountain is one of the more popular rides at Disney World, and I remember it being my favourite 10 years ago. Since we left all other parks relatively early, we decided to stay at the Magic Kingdom until midnight. After the nightly fireworks, the park started to really quiet down, basically to the point the park was dead. We got on a few attractions with no lines. My little brother, who was 13 at the time, was really getting into the spirit. He was wearing mouse ears and a bright green Mickey Mouse shirt. Me and my older brother teased him about it throughout the day. Somehow, we were so busy that it wasn't until around 11:30 at night that I remembered we hadn't even gone on Splash Mountain. I reminded my family, but my parents reminded me that the ride closes at 11. Since we were already in Frontierland, which is the section of the park that Splash Mountain was in, I convinced my family to check anyway. I walked ahead of my family to try and save time. When I arrived at the Splash Mountain area, there wasn't a soul in sight, other than the guy manning the entrance. He informed me that the ride closes when the park closes. I had a feeling I was right, but I suddenly felt the urge to pee, so I called out to my family, who were still approaching the entrance, to wait while I ran to the bathroom. Conveniently, there was one right next to the entrance. I'll spare you the details, but after I returned to the entrance of the ride, my family was gone. I called for them, walking around cluelessly, but there wasn't even a response. I turned back to the entrance to ask the worker who was standing there if he saw where they went, but he was gone too. I was about to take out my phone and call them, when suddenly I heard the sound of my two brothers laughing from down the entrance of the ride. What the hell is going on? I thought. They're not planning on going on the ride without me, are they? I ran down the cave-like entrance of the ride, but the sound of my brothers laughing didn't seem to get any closer. I called out for my parents and my brothers.
Mom? Dad? Henry? David?
But they didn't respond. How could they not hear me? I made it into the room where you board the log boats, but there were no employees anywhere in sight. But what I did see was one of the boats leaving the boarding room, and I could see my little brother in his green shirt and mouse ears sitting in the back seat of one of them. He was next to somebody else, probably my older brother. I screamed their names in anger,
David! Henry!
but they didn't hear me. I couldn't understand why they would go on the ride without me. Another boat was about to leave the room, since there were no employees to tell me otherwise. I was the next boat behind my family. As I slowly rode out of the room, and eventually outside, I couldn't see my family ahead of me. It didn't make sense. I wasn't far behind them to start with. How fast could their boat be going? I sat with mixed emotions, mostly confusion and anger, as the ride slowly progressed, until I finally entered the cave with all those singing robots. I guess where the ride actually begins. This is where things began to get strange. Well, stranger. The first thing I was greeted by were a bunch of giant singing birds. I remembered these things from 10 years ago. As they sang their song, their heads slowly turned to constantly face the boat. And their eyes, all their eyes, seemed to lock onto mine. I didn't remember them doing this last time. It was very unsettling, seeing those things looking at me as if they were actually aware of my presence. I obviously assumed it was some updated technology to add to the atmosphere of the ride. After all, it was Disney. Sitting all alone on this ride was uncomfortable. I know it's a Disney ride, but you wouldn't understand. Being on a dark and slow ride, all alone, at this time of night, with seemingly nobody around, it gives a very unsettling feeling. After the birds, I slowly approached Brer Fox and Brer Bear, who were seemingly plotting to capture Brer Rabbit. See, if you know anything about this ride, you would know that you're entertained throughout by animatronic versions of the characters from the movie Song of the South. Specifically, a hungry fox and his dim-witted henchman Bear, who constantly make goofy attempts to capture a rabbit for a quick snack. Anyway, back to the ride. Normally, Brer Bear would be carrying around a big wooden club, but not this animatronic. He was holding an axe, and instead of his normally goofy appearance, he had a more intimidating look that was definitely not child-friendly, and standing on his shoulders was Brer Fox, only a much more evil and scary version. He had much sharper teeth. Instead of his kid-friendly evil smile, It was a much more disturbing face, a clearly unhappy and resentful face. Upon getting closer, I could see that the fox had a large knife in his hand. The two animatronics began speaking, or at least the ride audio provided sounds for the characters speaking. But the voices were also off. The bear was so muffled and distorted, it was incomprehensible, and the voice of the fox, it almost sounded demonic. The background music was too loud for me to make out anything being said though. My boat passed the two characters, only to approach something equally unsettling. There was Brer Rabbit, but instead of singing like I remembered he did, he was just sitting on top of a broken mailbox. Instead of his normally happy face, he had on a depressed face, with bloodshot eyes, and a red stain on his pink shirt, presumably blood. This wasn't right. Disney wouldn't do something like this. I didn't want to be on this ride anymore. I shouted for my family in hopes that they might hear me, but there was no response. The song switched to the Laughing Place song, but it sounded different. It didn't have that cheerful feel to it. At this point, every single animatronic character on site was making direct eye contact with me. They were not cheerful, kid-friendly faces though. They were angry, hateful faces. This had to be a joke, I thought. I must be going crazy or something. They wouldn't do something like this. Not at a kids' park. The next time I saw the main characters, it was even worse. Brer Fox was waving his arm in anger, yelling something incomprehensible at Brer Bear, whose axe was now covered in blood. The first thought that came up was, whose or what's blood? Then I saw Brer Fox, who was actually waving something in his hand. It was a dismembered arm. The arm of Brer Rabbit. In front of the two robots was a blood trail. A blood trail that looked too real. It all looked too real. I could see fake blood dripping out of the prop that the fox was holding. It has to be fake blood, I thought to myself. Before exiting the section of the ride, there was one more disturbing scene. Brer Rabbit, limping across the field, with a trail of blood following him. It didn't make sense. The blood actually dripping on the floor, only appearing behind him. How could that be? Unless someone cleans up the blood every time the boat passes by. But by this time, it was pointless to try and rationalize any of this. All I wanted to do was get off this ride and see my family's reaction. After this, finally came the most anticipated part of the ride, which was the big drop. The boat climbed up to an angle and began to climb up the hill. At this point, anybody would be excited, but I wasn't thinking about it. I was so focused on what I had just seen on a Disney ride. As I neared the top of the hill, there was one more scene waiting at the side. From what I remember, 10 years ago, it was Brer Rabbit, tied to a pole over a fire, begging to be let go by Brer Fox. But this time, it was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen in my life. Brer Rabbit was still seen tied to a pole over a fire, but Brer Bear was also there this time, with Brer Fox standing right beside him. The bear raised his axe high into the air and with one swift, almost too realistic motion, he swung the axe straight through Brer Rabbit's neck, slicing his head clean off. Fake blood sprayed out from the thing as the head fell to the floor. The red liquid even sprayed out to my face, and that's when I smelt it. The metallic smell blood gives off. It was real blood. I started to gag in disgust and shock, ready to throw up. The head hit the ground with a loud thud, and then rolled off into the water. Suddenly, all the lights in the ride went out, and all the background noises stopped, and it was pitch dark inside. All I could see was the hint of moonlight coming from the top of the hill, and then coming from behind me, even over the sound of the rails pulling the boat up the hill, and the water moving down the hill. I could hear the sound of the heavy splashing coming from the bottom, the kind of splashing you would hear from somebody running through water. I turned around to see nothing but darkness behind me, but the splashing was still getting closer. And just as I reached the top of the lift hill, I could see a giant humanoid figure, probably 8 feet tall, begin to run up the lift hill. As it ran closer, it stretched out its long arms, seemingly ready to pull me out of this boat. The shock of it all prevented me from being able to note any of its features before dropping down to the bottom of the hill outside. What did I just see? I must be going crazy. What the fuck was that? I thought it was all a dream. I pinched myself. I even slapped myself in the face a few times. But it was real. Whatever. I was outside now. This was my chance to get off this nuthouse ride. I looked for any place to climb over the fake rock walls, but all of the walls were covered in big spikes. They weren't even just decorative props. These things looked dangerously sharp. Hell, they looked deadly, and they covered every single imaginable place to climb out. It was like I was really in a giant briar patch. It was like all these spikes were put here to prevent anybody from escaping the ride. I pulled out my phone and turned on its flashlight to see if it was safe to even hop out of the boat. I shined the flashlight down into the water, revealing even more spikes under the water. There was no way out at all. I screamed at the top of my lungs for help, but there was nobody around. It was pointless. I continued to constantly glance over my shoulder to make sure that thing that I just saw wasn't behind me. And with that, I slowly rolled back into the caves of the ride, where I was greeted by the Zippity-Doo-Dah song. Only, it was a much slower and depressing version. The first thing I was greeted by, after riding into the cave, was a big sign hanging over my head, reading, "Rest in peace, Brer Rabbit." And to the right were countless animatronic animals ranging from frogs to chickens to ducks, all dressed in black, apparently mourning the death of Brer Rabbit. Suddenly, the boat came to a sudden stop, and all the background music stopped, along with the motors and the water flow, leaving nothing but utter silence. I focused my attention on the dozens of animatronic characters who were now all frozen, apparently turned off. I turned away, scanning the room for any actual living beings or some kind of exit. I again resorted to shouting for help, but of course, it did no good. Just as I was ready to give up trying to escape the ride, my luck finally seemed to change, as I saw the glowing red text of an exit sign slightly hidden behind a big rock. That was my way out. There were no spikes in here. I took one more glance over my shoulder to make sure nothing was behind me. But that's when I saw something in my peripheral vision. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself to turn around and see that the dozens of mourning animatronic animals have all turned their heads to face me. But whatever was doing this didn't allow me to witness this for more than a few seconds, because the lights went out inside the cave once again, leaving me in complete darkness and silence. Even though it was rather cold inside, I felt myself starting to sweat. I could feel my heart punching the inside of my chest. The sound of heavy footsteps coming from the platform broke the silence. I found myself hugging the edge of the boat, too scared to even think about getting out of the boat. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of the platform, and then the boat started to rock back and forth. Something got into the boat. I leaned against the wall in shock and horror, still as a statue. The thought of something grabbing my foot the second I tried to hop out of the boat haunted my mind, paralyzing me in that position. I stayed still like this, not even moving my arm to itch for what felt like 10 minutes. My eyes were somewhat adjusting to the dark, but I refused to turn my head to see what was behind me. Just as soon as I began to think I should make a dash for it, I felt something grab my right shoulder. I didn't even dare to look at the hand that was grabbing me. I immediately jumped out of the boat and ran onto the platform. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, helping me to find my way through the props to the exit door. The door led to a long hallway, where I eventually found the back door, leading to the outside of the ride. I was safe. I made it out alive. I immediately dialed my mum's phone number, and she answered within seconds, as if she was waiting for me to call. I asked her if she was all right. She said she was fine. I screamed into the phone to meet me by the exit of the park right away. She sounded confused and asked me where I was, but I hung up the phone and ran to the exit of Magic Kingdom, planning to never return again. Since this experience, my parents have been sending me to many psychiatrists and seeking as much therapeutic help as possible, but I'm still convinced that I hadn't imagined it. It was too real. My advice to you: never ride something like this alone during a very slow day, late at night. I don't know how or why they would do this. I don't know if Disney is hiding something. I still think of the creature I caught a glimpse of, and whatever that thing was that was in the boat with me. I sometimes wish I had turned around to see what had grabbed my shoulder, just to kill the curiosity that I know will never go away. But maybe I should be happy I didn't turn around. Possibly the strangest thing about all of this though, when I met up with my family at the exit of the park and tried to get some reactions from them, they told me that after I went to the bathroom, they simply walked around waiting for me. They never got on the ride. It had been 3 years since my family had last gone on vacation to Florida, something we did annually before the recession hit. Since we now had enough money, my parents decided, under the popular demand of my sister and I, that we go to Walt Disney World again.
We were both teenagers, and our parents kind of saw this as a bit juvenile, but decided it would be fun anyway. I could not wait to finally go back, and neither could my sister. Being avid theme park goers as well, we were especially attracted to the creativity and the, well, magic, as one would say, about the rides there. They never got old, and had their share of nostalgia and excitement. However, there was one other reason I wanted to go. You would normally associate Disney World with words such as excitement, fun, and happiness. But with these characterizations come counterbalances. After scrolling through OMG Facts one night, I came across a rather interesting fact. It was about an abandoned water park in Walt Disney World, apparently named River Country. I was absolutely appalled by this, since I had previously thought of Disney in a more idealistic and perfect way. The water park was directly on the shores of Bay Lake, being that huge, stagnant body of water adjacent to the Magic Kingdom. River Country was, and still is, on the same side as the theme park just mentioned, but right next to a resort called Walt Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort. Surrounding the water park, on the resort side, is a large, green wall, with signs dotting it. The place opened in 1976, and used water from Bay Lake in most of the park's attractions. It was very rustic and wilderness-based in design, and contained artificial rocks that resembled those on another attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. There was a dam present to keep chunks of dirt and mud from getting into the water too, so guests did not have to worry about swimming in an artificial bog created by water from the lake. It was open for 25 years, closing its doors in 2001, and in 2005, a statement released by Disney said that the park would be closed for good. So, for about 11 years, River Country has been sitting abandoned. Nature is in its advanced stages of reclaiming the area, but the slides remain, and so do the artificial rocks and the small pond, now a swamp, that was used for swimming. Many urban explorers have infiltrated the area, jumping over the walls to get footage of the abandoned water park. One of the most controversial things about the park nowadays is why it's closed, which is what I was destined to find out. I wanted to see some real footage of the area before it closed as well, since, from what I heard, it was very joyous and bustling with tourists, compared to its ghost town status today. I was without internet at the time, so about 2 days before we were planning to leave, I went to the local library, which archived many old videos that people in my community had dug up in their attics and donated to the library to be part of a small historical society. Hoping that I might find some good footage, I asked the librarian if they happened to carry any videos concerning family vacations. She nodded and brought me to a small section containing many old VCR cassettes and a few DVDs here and there. After about half an hour of searching, I finally came across a cassette with the words,
the old-fashioned swimming hole, inscribed on top of it. This was the term used to describe river country during its glory days, so I took it, almost certain that it was the footage I was looking for. I asked the librarian if I could sign it out, but she told me that the historical videos had to stay in the library. I could, however, watch the video in a small conference room behind the front desk. The librarian led me into a windowless room, and I took a seat in front of the television. She left the room and closed the door so that the audio would not disturb any other library patrons. I popped the cassette into the VCR under the TV and turned the lights off so I could see the video better. I was expecting the quality to be low anyway. For about half a minute or so, the screen was grey and was accompanied by a loud bleeping noise, typical for old VCR cassettes. The grey soon disappeared, showing footage of two individuals in front of the entrance of River Country. They were both men, and it was either very late at night or very early in the morning, as nobody else was in the park. Very few of the park's lights were on either. On the bottom left corner of the screen was the date, November 1st, 2001. This was significant because the water park closed for good the very next day on November 2nd. The two men were talking about how they were denied entrance to the park in the morning, since it had reached its guest capacity limit. They also stated that at only these hours of night could they get past the park security. The two men walked up to the bigger water slides in the park, which led directly into the pond, supplied by the green water of Bay Lake. Once they both got on top of the slide, which was encircled by artificial orange rocks, one man prepared to slide down. The two laughed over what seemed to be an inside joke, and finally, the cameraman ended up pushing his friend down. I heard him scream in delight as he descended to the pond. The cameraman then proceeded back the way he came to get to the slides and across a bridge that traversed the small lagoon. He ended up back on the pond's shore where the sound of a splash was heard. This is when the video started to unsettle me a little. After waiting at the shore of the pond for about 3 minutes, nobody surfaced. The cameraman began to cry his friend's name frantically and started to run back to get help at the Fort Wilderness Resort. He stopped abruptly though at what seemed to be the kiddie area, a small, shallow pond. On hearing a faint cough, he instantly turned around and saw a barely visible shadow about 10 or so feet behind him. Relieved, the cameraman started to approach his friend, glad that he was okay. But again, he abruptly halted. The friend's head was hanging down, and he slowly inched it up. The cameraman started to hyperventilate as the features of the other man's face began to show. Crimson, dry blood was caked around his mouth, and some was even dripping off his chin. He was missing all the hair on his head as well. But one of the most disturbing parts of this image was that there were patches of skin missing that revealed parts of the man's skull and jawbone, and he was even missing his right eye, leaving an empty socket. I became severely nauseous at the sight of this, to the point where I was swallowing my own vomit. My heart began to race as fear started to settle in my body. As the last minutes of the film approached, the horrendous figure muttered something that sounded like,
"There is no hope.
under the water. And with that, the cameraman ran for his life, wheezing and panicking throughout his ordeal. I wanted to turn the television off and run myself, so I bolted to the door leading out of the room. I reached for the doorknob, but paused. The television was giving off the sound of an old furnace found in the basement of a home, just in a softer tone. This tone, for some unknown reason, kept me from moving anywhere. I was just staring blankly at the television. The cameraman was still sprinting, but did not seem to be making any progress. He ended up back at the large pond where the slide had dumped his friend. You could hear him sobbing softly, fearing for his life. Suddenly, the tape began to gradually slow down as the man frantically looked from side to side. The audio volume, along with the furnace sound, went up as the video lagged. Haltingly, the cameraman turned all the way around and shrieked at the sight of his friend. The video paused on this frame, exposing the caked blood all over the man's face. The top of his skull bone was now completely exposed, his right eye still missing. His mouth was wide open, and coming from it was what looked like a combination of the water from Bay Lake and bile. This stayed on the screen for about 10 seconds and switched to a black screen displaying one single message. The epidemic begins today. Instantly, the power went out and I was left alone in the darkness of the conference room. I became so terrified as I could not see a thing, and I could not see the door either. I began to shake in absolute fear. River Country had closed because of this, and it was obvious. Walt Disney World had been keeping a disgusting secret. I rushed to the other side of the room, disorientated. But all I felt was warm breath seeping down my neck and the smell of bile.
Have you ever heard of the Disney mirror ritual? Don't be fooled by its name, or its location at the happiest place on earth. It's a fairly dangerous ritual, with a high chance of getting caught. Granted, the payoff is fairly high. It is not known why, or how, this ritual came to be at Disney World. It is said that each of the Disney parks has its own unique ritual, with the same consequences for failure. But the one at Disney World seems to have the most known information. This is a mirror ritual. Mirror mythology is well invoked in Disney stories. Think Beauty and the Beast, Snow White, 1 Hour in Wonderland and such. I'm sure you might think such a ritual would take place at the Haunted Mansion or one of the spookier rides, but you'd be wrong. The main part of this ritual takes place at Cinderella's castle, roughly the epicenter of the Magic Kingdom. The night part of the ritual must take place between 2 and 4 AM. To complete this ritual, you will need 3 items. 1. A piece of chalk. 2. A knife that has had its handle broken off. In other words, simply the blade. The type of knife does not matter, but as you will need to sneak this in past security, you might want a smaller blade you can conceal in your shoe or other hiding place. 3. A broken shard of mirror, roughly the size of your palm. You might want to find a pre-broken shard, if you believe in the superstition of 7 years bad luck.
The ritual begins during the daytime hours of the Magic Kingdom section of Disney World. During the day, you must hide the 3 items in separate areas of the park. The areas to choose from are Main Street USA, Liberty Square, Fantasyland, Adventureland, Frontierland, and Tomorrowland. Study the map of the park and decide what route would be easiest to travel undetected. Don't pick distances you can't manage. Keep in mind that the area around Cinderella's castle will be the most heavily patrolled by security. While there are security cameras in the park, don't worry about them. Something about this ritual makes them seem to malfunction. Before hiding the items, head to the tunnel going through Cinderella's castle. Be careful here. There are some Disney staff that are aware of the ritual and know to keep an eye out for those attempting it. Hide the chalk in your hand. Pick out a brick you are able to reach at face level, and when you are absolutely sure no one is watching you. Critical tip. You might want a friend to make a distraction, or ask any immediate staff questions to get their attention. Mark the corner of the brick with chalk. Say the words, "Mirror, mirror," then leave. This will tell the park you intend to play. You will use this brick during the ritual. Then find a hiding place for the items. At this point, you have completed the daytime part of the ritual. Use the remainder of your time as you will until the park closes, but make sure to find a place you can remain hidden once the park closes for the night. It's not easy, but it has been done. If you decide not to go through with the ritual, retrieve the items, erase the chalk mark, and leave the park. You can only cancel the ritual during the daytime hours. Do not attempt the ritual again. Ever. Do not emerge from your hiding place right after the park closes. It will be full of maintenance workers and patrolling security. Wait until at least an hour after the park closes. But remember, you need to be done before 4 AM. The security presence will be smaller at that hour, but by no means gone. Watch for the roaming security guards and make your way to your items. Retrieve the mirror shard last, or you will trigger the most dangerous part of the ritual early. If you reach any of your hiding places and the item is gone, run. The park doesn't accept your challenge. You need to reach the entrance and get out, or even get yourself busted by security, which will be a much preferable fate. Once you retrieve the mirror shard, you will begin the second, more dangerous phase of the ritual. Security patrols are no longer your concern. They will have mysteriously disappeared, or gone dark. You may see a flashlight beam way off in the distance, but they will not come close to you. Some chalk this up to magic. Others theorize that completing the steps until this point triggers a parallel dimension of sorts within the park. Regardless of this cause, you have a new concern. Make haste and head towards Cinderella's castle, but once again, try to stay out of sight. Use the mirror shard to look around corners and behind you, but keep the broken blade in your dominant hand. You are on the lookout for figures that have been dubbed the False. The False take the form of Disney mascots you might see during the daytime. Don't be fooled. The paid Disney mascots went home hours ago. It's not exactly hard to tell the difference. Suits worn by these figures will appear filthy, matted, and generally tattered. You will most likely find them lurking around corners, which is why you want to use the mirror first. If you see one of the False in your mirror, take your blade lightly between your fingers. Drag it across the reflection on the mirror with the point. This will prompt the figure to move away. However, odds are you will have at least one encounter with the False face to face. They are capable of appearing at will if you are on a straight street or bridge with no turns. Should you see a false at any point, not as a mirror reflection, shut your eyes immediately and gently place the mirror shard at your feet, but keep hold of the blade. Remain still with your eyes shut and listen for footsteps and rattling breath. The false will be moving slowly towards you. It will stop at arm's length in front of you and reach. Your only chance for escape is to estimate when it is reaching for you. Then reach out and jab the figure itself with your blade. Do not miss. You won't get a second chance. Miss, and you fail the ritual. Consequences of failure are discussed later. If your aim is true, the false will hiss in pain and begin moving away. When the footsteps are no longer audible, you can open your eyes, retrieve your mirror, and continue on your path. Critical tip. Your blade will become weaker each time a face-to-face encounter occurs. If your blade breaks, you will be defenseless. The false will know. Keep face-to-face encounters at a minimum. Should you successfully arrive at Cinderella's castle, you will be safe. Find the brick you marked, take your mirror, and hold it to the brick. Trace a chalk outline around the shard. When you pull your hand away, the shard will remain on the surface. Step back and turn around 3 times clockwise. With each turn, say the words "mirror, mirror" for a total of 3 times. Upon completing the 3rd turn, you will face a wall, only to see that the surface area of the brick has become that of a mirror. Look into the mirror and you will see the faint outline of a clouded face. Here is where the goal of the ritual comes into play. Make sure you choose the question beforehand. The face will slowly say, past, present, future. To choose, nod your head after the mirror says the one you want. If you nod for past, the mirror will show you the answer to a question regarding the past. It can range from a personal mystery from your own past to a historical mystery, such as who killed JFK. For present, you can ask to be shown a solution to a problem currently plaguing you or an issue the world currently faces. Future, needless to say, will show you a future outcome yet to pass. Ask the mirror your question and watch your long-awaited answer. Once you have your answer, step away from the mirror again. Turn around 3 times, now in a counterclockwise direction. Again, with each turn, say the words "mirror, mirror" for a total of 3 times. Upon completing the 3rd turn, the mirror will be gone, and so will the shard. The castle has taken it as tribute. Leave the castle. Head back to your hiding place. On your way, drop the blade in the moat surrounding the castle. Keep hold of the chalk. You need not worry about getting caught by security or any faults at this point. The park respects your accomplishment and will allow you temporary safe passage safely. However, do not take this gesture as an excuse to linger or explore. This will be taken as arrogance or an insult, and your protection will be revoked. Simply head back to your initial hiding spot as quickly as you can. When you return to the hiding place, draw a circle of chalk around you. If in a location with a door, draw half a circle around the door on the floor. Remain hidden until morning when the park opens and visitors have been let back in. Critical tip. Do not fall asleep. Do not respond to any voices or footsteps you may hear, no matter how close the sound gets to you. If you're hiding in a place with a door, do not react to knocks, no matter how frantic they become. You will remain safe if you stay awake and quiet. Most important of all, Do not follow along if you hear a Disney song being played. This includes singing, humming, or even following the song in your mind. Cover your ears with your hands and don't let the song get stuck in your head. The following day, once you know visitors have begun entering the park, leave your hiding spot and immediately head for the exit of the park. Do not stop to do anything, just leave. Drop the chalk at the entrance, and once you have left, never return to Disney World. Ever. The park knows you, and your welcome has been worn out. Now, the part that is yet to be discussed is what happens if you fail the ritual. Should you be caught by the faults during the item retrieval, linger too long outside your hiding place after completing the night ritual, or answer to any voices or knocks before morning. Should one of the faults place their hand on you, you will lose the ability to move freely. If you return to the park after successfully completing the ritual, you will encounter a fault that no one else will appear to see. In any case, they will slowly lead you to the entrance of the park. You can walk away then, but no matter where you go or what you do during the night, the next day you will find yourself at the entrance of the park once again. Only you will once again have no control over your actions. As if in a hypnotic trance, you will move towards your fate. Perhaps you will find yourself on a ride with non-functioning seat restraints, only to be thrown out onto the tracks. Walking on an above-ground monorail tracks with an oncoming train behind you. On a riverboat that flips into the water, not made for swimming. In the path of an oncoming parade float. Whatever fate the happiest place on earth has for you, rest assured, it won't involve a happily ever after.